Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Ladies and gentlemen, it is rivalry week in South Bend. Notre Dame, the 13th ranked team in the country, hosts the 20th ranked and 5-1 USC Trojans in a battle for the jeweled shillelagh this Saturday night in South Bend, Indiana. Under the lights, kickoff is at 7:30 p.m. inside of Notre Dame Stadium. Right now, Notre Dame is 9.5-point favorites on FanDuel, and the over-under is set at 61.5. This is a huge game. I can't wait to talk about all the implications for this game, all the different storylines for this game. And Brian, you and I were talking before the show, as fun as it is talking about Arkansas and Boise State and NC State and Purdue, and these are the matchups that you love to cover when you talk Notre Dame football. Notre Dame, USC, in the greatest intersectional rivalry in college football. Had to make sure I got that right this time around. This is going to be a huge one in South Bend, Brian. I'm excited to dive into it this week.
I mean, I was kind of looking forward to having some fun talking about the transcontinental rivalry that's happening this weekend, but you got it right. You nailed it, Trev. This is always a great week, and it's always a fun week to talk about it because it's not just about the analysis and the X's and O's and the breakdowns, which we do, but we're both Notre Dame fans. We've been Notre Dame fans our whole lives. And this is that one rivalry that you really get excited about. I mean, I have a great deal of respect for the Navy rivalry, but it's not one where it's like, it's Navy week, baby, let's go. It's not that same kind of rivalry. Notre Dame hasn't played Michigan in the regular season since 2019. And, then they played in 2018. Before that, their last meeting was back in 2014. It just, the last 15, 20 years, that just hasn't been a big rivalry. And then, of course, there was a period of time where it was Charlie Weiss versus Rich Rod, and that was a terrible rivalry. And then it was Brian Kelly versus Brady Hoke, and it wasn't, a great rivalry, some weird games. And that was never a rivalry that I viewed like this one. I have a respectful disdain for USC. And the respectful disdain is not from I dislike and despise your program like I feel about Michigan. It's more of I am still remembering that game back in 2005 when, you ruined Notre Dame's chances for a dream season. I still remember, thinking back to sometimes when, the dominance that USC showed over Notre Dame in the 2000s. I think back to the stories that some of the older Notre Dame fans that I grew up with, talking to Lou Emoji about, the big game. And I think it was 74 when Notre Dame had a big lead at halftime, and then USC comes out and rolls them in the second half. Eric Parsegian would have probably 2-3 more national titles if it wasn't for John McKay and USC. And so it's kind of like when I was a kid and as a Celtics fan thinking about the Lakers. I hated the Lakers because they were good. They could beat the Celtics. I didn't hate the Hawks because, Hawks are good and it's a great rivalry, but the Celtics are always going to beat the Hawks. They're always going to beat the Pistons, at least as long as Larry Bird is still healthy. The Lakers were the one team you had that healthy disdain because they were the opposite of who you were as a Celtics fan. They were flash, you were, blue collar, and they were Magic and you were Bird, and, they were West Coast, you were East Coast, and they could beat you, and then you look to it's a similar one here. So it's not a I hate you type of feeling that I have towards USC. I know for some people it is, and that's totally fine. But for me, it's not. It's more of it's a healthy respect because you know what USC brings to the table and you know what a win over USC means. And this year's especially nice, Trev, because it's really the first time, in a while where I really feel like this is a really, like, both teams are kind of doing something here. Now, obviously, 2023, they were both ranked, but Notre Dame had already had 2 losses, and the odds of them being a playoff team were very slim. USC was still in the playoff hunt, so you felt good ruining their season. Last year, USC was unranked. They tried to ruin Notre Dame's season and almost did to a degree. And so it's more of like, hey, this is that game where both of these teams have playoff / national championship aspirations. And it's been a long time since that was true. Even in 2017, when they were both really good, neither of those teams were, Notre Dame still had a playoff shot, but USC, was not even in the top 10 at the time. They would have needed to beat Notre Dame. So you'd probably have to go back to 2017 when you felt like the winner was going to go into this with a chance to be a playoff team. And, so we haven't had as many of those. Whereas when I was a kid, 88, it's end of the season, it's 1 versus 2. USC beats Notre Dame, they got a shot to go to the Rose Bowl and win a national championship, and you think of 1989 and USC and Notre Dame, they're both top 10 football teams. So, I remember all those games, Trev, and I kind of miss those games. 05, championship implications for both teams. The 89 game, it was number 1 Notre Dame versus number 9 USC. I remember those games. No, in 1990, it's number 7 Notre Dame versus number 18 USC. And you kind of grow up and you just get used to those Notre Dame USC games where it's like, these are two really good football teams. Number 5 Notre Dame at number 19 USC in 1992, watching Reggie Brooks go crazy in that game. So, that's kind of what I remember growing up, Trev, is Notre Dame dominated USC under Lou Holtz, but there was a lot of years where they were good, hard, competitive football games. And so there's just so much to this one beyond just number 13 versus number 20. Winner has that big playoff, resume feather in their cap. It just means so much more. And it's the only game that Notre Dame plays this year that is like that for me. And that's what has me juiced up about this game, Trev. What say you?
Oh, I get it, man. I just flat out don't like USC. That's where I'm at with it. The first game I ever sat and watched from start to finish with my dad, the game that got me started, was on October 15th of 2005. That was the infamous Bush push game. And I will remember that forever. I will absolutely remember that game forever. One, for the simple fact that it was a fantastic game. Like, I know the outcome wasn't in Notre Dame's favor, but from a football standpoint, and it's something that I've learned to appreciate the older that I've gotten, but that game was phenomenal. It really was. But I remember everything that was leading up to that game, man. I really do. I mean, it was Charlie Weiss had the press. That's when they were doing like the pep rallies in the Joyce Center. And he was getting everybody fired up. And he's like, when I looked at this schedule, the one thing that I want is for, when that team from Southern California comes out to South Bend, I want them to be number 1 in the country, and I want them to be undefeated. I remember watching that. My dad and I went. I remember sitting in front of the TV and watching that game unfold, and then how it went. That was the first memory that I had of having and riding the emotions of a big Notre Dame football game.
Were you about 8?
Yep.
About 8, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that is seared into my memory. I will remember that forever, because my dad and I, we don't have a whole lot in common hobby-wise. Notre Dame football is about probably one of the only things, that and like our love for different movies. And that is the one thing that kind of galvanized what our relationship is. And we would go back and forth. We talk about that game still to this day. And it's one of those that there's a little bit of me that remembers that every single time that Notre Dame plays USC in South Bend. I talked to Lauren about it for 2.5 hours on our drive up to South Bend in 2023. You know what I mean? Like, but these are the rivalry games that I love. These are like, I have an appreciation, respect for the Navy rivalry, Purdue, because it's in state, but like we've talked about before, the Notre Dame-Purdue rivalry has not been competitive really in my lifetime, and then with, you have your other rivalries. They played Pitt all the time. They haven't really played Michigan State a whole lot. Notre Dame doesn't play Michigan anymore. So for me, this is the kind of that rivalry. It's like, hey, they don't like us. We don't like them. It's not like a hatred, but it's just like, we want to beat you no matter what. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's where I'm at. And I remember all the games in my lifetime. I mean, I remember 2009 in Notre Dame Stadium. That game was crazy. I remember 2010 when they went out to LA and they really turned it around, because USC had dominated that rivalry.
Ended the streak. Yes.
Like, that was the Robert Hughes game. It was like kind of rainy, and Robert Hughes just dominated and finally played like a 235-pound running back.
Yes.
Harrison
Smith had a huge pick in that game.
Yes.
Yeah. Chris Gallipo still has a Robert Hughes footprint right there on his forehead from that game.
Man. I mean, I remember the 2012 game when they ended the season in the Coliseum on a goal line stand to make it to the national championship game. I remember 2015 and that Deshaun Kaiser touchdown pass to Will Fuller. I remember 2018 they had to end their season in the Coliseum to make the college football playoffs. And then obviously we all remember what happened last year. And then I was at the game in person in 2023 when Notre Dame's defense absolutely took USC's offense to the woodshed. So there's a lot of great memories that I have from this rivalry game. And one that, and I know we're going to get into it later, needs to continue for the good of college football. We'll talk about that later in the show.
Yeah.
But Brian, big picture, man, this is a big
Well,
one, and I look forward to this week every single year.
It is. And you talk about you and your dad, and my first Notre Dame game that I remember USC was 88, 1-2. The first game I ever attended inside Notre Dame Stadium, my dad and I were talking about this the other day. He goes, he was kind of saying, if it wasn't for you doing this job, I don't know that I would have ever got a chance to see a Notre Dame game, which is wild because we only lived 3 hours away from South Bend growing up in Ohio. We just didn't realize it. Back then in the 80s and 90s, it's just travel was different back then. At least it was for where we grew up. But we were at the 07 game against USC when they wore the throwback jerseys from 77. And it's funny because the game was terrible. I mean, they got destroyed. But, I think of that day and I smile because it was like seeing the stadium and being inside and, just going through that whole experience. It's really one of the few times I've ever actually been at a Notre Dame game where I was just a fan. I've only ever really been to 2 Notre Dame games as a fan in my life. Well, 3, because I had Vince cover the Fiesta Bowl, and I took my dad and my nephew to the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State. So really 3 my whole life. I've been to 3 games as a fan. I've been to over 100 Notre Dame games, but it's just only 3 as a fan. So it is an interesting rivalry, and everybody in the chat's got some sort of USC story about their fandom, and that's what I love about this rivalry. And you are absolutely correct, Trev. It is the one remaining rivalry that there is still some juice to it. To your point, even when Notre Dame and Purdue were playing all the time, it was like you're supposed to beat Purdue. They were never on your level. Pitt's the similar way. There isn't that rivalry where you beat that team and it says something to people. It says, hey, these guys are really good, and that's what makes this one different. And that's what's at stake for this game for Notre Dame now. Is it's another chance to go out there and say, hey, we are that team, just from a rivalry standpoint, Trevor. But then, of course, there's also some big picture things that we'll dive into with it. But let's you ready to get this thing cooking, Trev? You ready to talk about the Notre Dame USC rivalry and dive into that before we get into sort of the what's at stake for this particular team? I'm ready to roll.
Always, man. I'm always ready. You know it. Well, let's talk about it then, Brian. Let's talk about this series history, this historic rivalry between Notre Dame and USC. And I know you have something up on the message boards about it. You had an article about it, the Notre Dame and USC series history. You can find that boards at irishbreakdown.com, also on the free website. But you go and you look, Notre Dame leads this all-time series 52, 38, and 5. And that's also including the vacated wins in some of those. Is that correct?
For both teams. Yeah, it does. Because if you look at Winsipedia, they have it 50, 37, and 5. Because they don't count the 12 and 13 Notre Dame wins because they were vacated, which is stupid. They also don't count the 05 game for USC, which again is stupid. We all watched the game play. We all watched USC win that game. Technically, USC didn't win that game. That's stupid. Yes, they did. We watched it. We all had the tears and sadness. It's funny you talking about watching it with your dad, Trevor. You were 8 years old. My USC story is I was coaching that day, and I believe we were playing Chowan College. Maybe it's Averett. And I had my video guy go into our office and hook up, because back then you could, basic TV, you could hook up a cord into the VCR and you could then play it on your VCR. And then he had it set up to go to our projector. So after the game, we won. I did the fastest handshake ever with other teams' parents. Hey, hope it's good. Great. Sprinted, man. I'm normally, I'm not that fast. Like when I was in my 20s, I was good athlete, but I probably ran a 4.2 to the locker room to get to the coach's offices. And as I walked in, I think it was 14-14, but it's when as soon as I walk in, Tommy Zibikowski fields that punt that he takes back to the house. So that was my memory, and it kind of went downhill after that. But what a tremendous, tremendous game. But 52, 38, and 5 is the all-time record. And it's been a streaky rivalry, Trev. It really has. Early on from 1926 to 54, it was a rivalry that Notre Dame dominated. USC won 7 of those games. And then, Notre Dame dominated at the beginning of the 60s. And then there were some times in the 60s where Notre Dame, won in 60, 61, 63, 65, 66. They tied in 68 and 69. But the years when USC beat Notre Dame back in the 1960s, it was, like, oh man, it's like that might have kept Notre Dame from winning a championship. So, 1962, Notre Dame was not ranked. They played number one USC, did not beat them. In 1964, Notre Dame was ranked number one in the country. They went out to play USC, who was not ranked, I don't believe, and lost 20-17. That's a year where Notre Dame, maybe they got a shot to win the national championship if they could have beat USC. 1967, Notre Dame is the defending national champions. They're ranked number 5. They're playing number one USC. Notre Dame had lost to Purdue, who was ranked 10th at the time. Win over number one USC at home vaults you back up, with the chance to maybe go win a championship. And Notre Dame loses that game and obviously doesn't have a chance to repeat their national championship. So you just look at all these great games, Trev, and you look at the opportunities that Notre Dame has had to go out there and maybe compete for and win a championship. And USC was a team that kind of kept them from, those things happening. So I think there was also some games in the 70s. I think 1971, let's see, Notre Dame was number 6. They lost to an unranked USC team. That was a game where, Notre Dame wins that game. Perhaps it vaults them up. Another great game was in 1972. Notre Dame was ranked number 10. USC was ranked number 1. And let me see if it was the 73 game. No, they beat USC. That's right. They won the title that year. 74, that's the year, Trev, where Notre Dame is ranked number 5. USC is ranked number 6. I believe it was 24-7 at halftime. And then Charles White went off and USC ended up winning 55-24. Just a crazy, crazy second half. So there have been some absolutely epic games over the years, Trev. And in your lifetime, I mean, even when USC wasn't good, they gave Notre Dame's 2012 team everything they could handle. They definitely gave Notre Dame's 2018 team everything they could handle for a while. Notre Dame's down 10-0 going into that game in 2018. You lose that game, Ohio State's getting in over you. Like that was that year where Ohio State had their one loss to Purdue. I think Ohio State jumps them if they jump in there. So it's one of those things, Trev, where you just last year Notre Dame's looking to clinch a playoff berth. USC was what at the time, 6-5, something like that. They're out, and they gave Notre Dame everything they can handle, and that's just what makes this rivalry so much fun.
It's just one of the few rivalries left in college football where you can say that records don't matter. Rankings and records and accolades coming into the game just further adds to the magnitude of the game. But you to your point, you go back and you think about all the games, the great games that Notre Dame and USC has played. I mean, last year USC was 6-5 going into this matchup. They weren't anywhere near the top 25. And at one point, it was a tie ball game. USC was doing everything that they could have to try to beat Notre Dame. You think of 2018, you think of 2012. I mean, and then on the flip side of the coin, USC's undefeated. They're the 10th ranked team in the country. Returning Heisman winner Caleb Williams is their starting quarterback. They come to South Bend, and Notre Dame's 21st in the country,
and they're reeling. They just got their break speed off of them by Louisville the week before.
Yeah, and you would have, by watching that game, you take the little ranking numbers at the bottom of the NBC graphic away, you would have not thought that Notre Dame was the 21st ranked team in the country, and you would have not thought that USC was the 10th ranked team in the country and undefeated. So these are one of the very few rivalries. We talked about it last week. The Red River. That's one where it's like records don't matter. Rankings don't matter. Michigan, Ohio State. You throw out records. You throw out rankings. Iron Bowl. You throw out records. You throw out rankings. And this is the one for Notre Dame. And this is one of the very few remaining ones in college football that are left where it's just like, hey, it just doesn't matter. Whoever is ranked and whoever's what, you do get, and you and I hate this saying, but no matter what happens, you get a team's best when either USC or Notre Dame comes to town. That's what I love about these games, man. Absolutely.
And real quick, couple people point out in the chat, it was Anthony Davis that had that big game in 74. Anthony Davis, Charles White followed Anthony Davis. So it just kind of goes to show how great they were. And then before that, it was O.J. Simpson. Then it was Marcus Allen. And, if we're talking historically, this is RBU. This is running back U historically. So it's Anthony Davis. I get all those elite running backs that had big games against Notre Dame kind of bleed together. But thanks for the correction, guys. It was Anthony Davis that had that big game in 1974. But no, this is going to be a battle, Trev. There's no doubt about it, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And when you look at the series history, as I was mentioning earlier, you talk about the streakiness of it. The 1960s were still an era where USC started to get some traction, but Notre Dame was able to still win that decade. But then 1970, 71, 72 are USC wins. Notre Dame wins in 73. They win a title. USC wins in 74, 75, 76, 78, 79. Notre Dame wins in 77. What did 1973 and 1977 have in common, Trevor? They were years where Notre Dame won a national championship. So it's basically like if you beat USC, you got a shot to win a championship. If you don't, you're not going to win a national championship. So, then obviously into the 80s, that the rivalry is a little bit, still USC dominant. USC won in 80, 81, and 82. So from 1970 to 1982, Notre Dame only won 2 games, no ties. They only won 2 games. And then 1983 under Jerry Faust begins an era of dominance for Notre Dame. And so Notre Dame won 12 out of 13 games from 83 to 95. Lou Holtz was absolutely dominant against USC. They only had 1 loss against USC, and that was in his last year. They did tie in 1994. So, and then, you went USC won 3, Notre Dame won 3, and then in 02 began the stretch of dominance for USC, where USC won 8 games in a row. And Trev, let's be honest, there weren't a lot of close games in that stretch. You had the 05 game and the 09 game, but even the 09 game, which was a 1-touchdown game, Jimmy brought them back to make it close, but USC was controlling that game. They had dominance over the rivalry then. Notre Dame finally breaks a streak in 2010. USC comes to Notre Dame and beats a ranked Notre Dame team. The first game with the new golden helmets, the way that they are now, was 2011 against USC. And they kind of ruined that night. Still remember that. Notre Dame had a chance to remember. The USC jumped up. George Atkinson had a big kick return that game. Notre Dame was driving. It was 24-17. They're knocking on the goal line. Tommy Reese gets knocked out. Dane Chris comes in. They inexplicably ask Dane Chris to go under center. Ball goes through his legs. Jawanza Starling picks it up, runs it back for a touchdown. Like, that's what happens in rivalries like this, Trev. Look at the angst on your face as I bring that up. This was 15 years ago, and you still feel it the minute you start talking about that game. You feel it. And that's what makes this rivalry so great. And I promise you, USC fans are doing the same thing where they're like, you remember that one time, when we thought we were going to win another title and freaking Tony Rice came in and did this and did that. And you start thinking about it, but, then Notre Dame wins in 12, Notre Dame wins in 13, USC wins in 14, Notre Dame wins in 15, USC wins in 16, and then Notre Dame has now won 6 of the last 7. So as you can see, for the most part, this has been a rivalry of runs.
Yeah.
And hopefully Notre Dame can continue that run this season with this big matchup.
I'm hoping so, man. I still remember that 09 game too. Gary Gray had a late tip ball interception, returns it down. Notre Dame had the opportunity to throw a game-winning touchdown at the end, and they threw the pivot route to Kyle Rudolph. It was the same route that he ran against Purdue earlier that season in 09 to beat Purdue on the road on the last play on 4th down. But he had Duval Kamara wide open on an in cut in the back of the end zone, and he just missed him. Yeah, that one was rough. That game was crazy too, because USC was kind of taking Notre Dame to the woodshed in the first part of that game, and Notre Dame's defense was just putrid in the first half of that game, and that that was a game that Golden Tate on multiple occasions owned. What was his name? Taylor Mays. They're like 6'4" safety.
Yeah.
I mean, Golden Tate caught like a little slant route, ate a hit stick that Taylor Mays tried to put on him for a touchdown, and then Jimmy Clausen threw probably one of the best go balls I'd ever seen.
Yeah,
fitting it over top of the corner, but in between Taylor Mays for a touchdown. It was like a 50-yarder.
Taylor Mays drilled Golden Tate on that play too, but it just wasn't enough. Yeah,
man. Yeah, a lot of good games in this series, but here's the thing, though, Brian. We talk about all the good games in this series, and I think that's a perfect way to talk about the final point in this part. There's been a lot of talk this season about, will this rivalry continue? And there's been a lot of workings on both sides. And we are now at the point in this conversation where each side is pointing to either side. It's like, well, you said that you were going to do this. And well, you said that you were going to do this. But at the end of the day, Brian, when we start talking about why this series needs to continue, we've talked about it a lot already. But again, it's one of the best rivalries in college football and one that absolutely has to continue moving forward.
It does. I mean, why is it not continuing? Why is there a threat of it not continuing? And a lot of it is, number one, is because the quote-unquote leaders of college football no longer care about what made the sport the money pit that it is for them now, or I shouldn't, the money train that it is for them now. They're killing all the things that made it great, which made it what it is today. They don't care about tradition. They don't care about rivalries. They don't care about, back in the day when like you would go challenge yourself all the time. I mean, you talk about having to play certain schedules. I mean, it's like back then, you played 8 games. I'm looking at Notre Dame's 1977 season and 76 season, and you look at some of the games they play. 1976, Notre Dame played Alabama. Alabama had to play their normal, their normal SEC schedule, but then they also went out of conference and played SMU under Ron Meyer. They played Notre Dame. They played Louisville, who was not in the league at the time. And football was different back then. I mean, teams played other good teams. I mean, USC, during their tenure would do that. Obviously, they played Notre Dame every year. That obviously was a big one. But 1978, USC goes 12-1. They have to play their Pac-12 schedule. They have to play Notre Dame at home. Notre Dame was ranked number 8. They had to play UCLA, who was really good back then. Washington, who was really good back then. But then out of conference, they played Texas Tech. They played Michigan State. And then they played Alabama on the road. Number 1 Alabama had to go on the road and beat number 1 Bear Bryant, Alabama. And, we're able to get that win. But, that's what football was back then, Trev. That's what made it so great. The year that they played Alabama, who finished the year. Let me go see what Alabama's record was at the end of the year. Alabama finished that year. Notre Dame won the national championship. And, 1978. What year we look? No, 1977, I think, is the year we're looking at, right? When they played Alabama. I think I lost. Oh, no, it's 78. They lost to USC. So that year, USC had to play Alabama, who finished the year ranked number 1 in the AP. They had to play Notre Dame. Alabama or USC that year finished. Let me see, where'd USC finish in '88? They finished number 2 in the AP, which tells you a lot about voting back then. They went to Alabama, beat Alabama by 10, and they had the same record at the end of the year. USC beat number 1 Alabama. Michigan State, who finished number 12. They beat Washington. They beat a ranked UCLA on the team on the road. Washington finished that year 7-4 under the great Don James. UCLA finished the year ranked 14th. Notre Dame finished the year ranked 7th. Michigan, who they beat in the Rose Bowl, finished 5th, and yet they gave Bear Bryant the national championship that year. So, yeah, that's how it was. But think about that schedule, Trev, and we're killing that stuff. Now USC talking about, well, we already have to play a tough Big Ten schedule, pretending like they have to play Oregon, Washington, Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State every year, which they don't. And so now they're trying to duck out of playing games like that. I mean, it's as simple as that. They're trying to duck out of playing games like that because, Lincoln, that's who Lincoln Riley is, number 1. Let's be honest about that. That's why he left Oklahoma when they joined the SEC, went to USC thinking they're going to dominate the Pac-12, and then they go to the Big Ten. And it's just it's sad that there's a lot of people like this. There's a lot of people that don't appreciate it. USC now says, well, we'll play you, but we want to play at the beginning of the year. For a while there, Trevor, I was of the standpoint of you do whatever you have to do to keep this rivalry going. I'm not at that point anymore. I'm really not, because this rivalry has to continue, but not at all costs, because USC's already loaded it up. This rivalry used to be last game of the year every year, and USC just didn't want to keep coming to South Bend in November. So that's when they moved the home game into October. You've already kind of bent over backwards to make this rivalry continue. Now USC wants to make it first 2-3 games of the year. No, I'm at the point now where I want it to continue, but I'm tired of Notre Dame have to jump through hoops to play USC. And USC's already shown we don't care about tradition. We don't care about play. We're only going to play Notre Dame on our terms. We're going to leave the Pac-12, who we're almost 100-year member with, to go to the Big Ten for one reason and one reason only. That's it. And then complain about start times and travel and all that kind of stuff. Like, did you not think this was going to happen when you get to the Big Ten? So I'm at the point now, Trevor, where, you may disagree, please feel free to do so. I have really kind of come around on this because I'm so sick of USC's, just like they think, oh, Notre Dame needs us more than we need them. No, not really. Not really. And that's what's so frustrating because, Roger Dodger said this. I've listened to some USC podcasts on this. Fans want this series to happen. They absolutely want this series to happen. Boosters want this series to happen. But the leadership at USC, I don't think wants this game to happen unless it's on their terms 100%. And if I'm Notre Dame, I'm like, we're tired of bending over backwards. Like, here's an easy way to make this happen. We'll play the last game of every year. Well, you can't. We've got our – listen, it's very easy for the Big Ten to say, okay, you've got a rivalry game at the end of every year. The SEC does it for Florida. They do it for Kentucky. They do it for Georgia. The ACC does it for Georgia Tech. They do it for Florida State. They do it for Louisville. There's plenty of rivalries. Clemson. Right. Oklahoma and Texas for years played in a game every year, and they were never in the same conference. Oh, Clemson and South Carolina. It's another one, Trev. Those leagues can do it. Why can't the Big Ten? Hey, every year, don't give USC a game at the end of the year because they got to either play at home against Notre Dame or at Notre Dame. It's simple. But no. USC doesn't want to do that because they don't want to have to make a trip out here in the snow in November. So I am at the point now where while I want it to continue, I'm like, look, USC's the one killing it. And so let's see what happens if they get rid of this. Because right now, if you don't beat Ohio State and Oregon, like what's that big win that's kind of going to vault you up there? What's that consistent rivalry that you can point to? UCLA? So no, it's not. And plus you look at Notre Dame's schedule the next 10 years, they got plenty of teams already lined up for early in the season. What's the problem with playing them early? It's number one, your schedule's already front loaded enough. Now you're forcing your schedule more front loaded. And it's just another example of you bending over backwards. Some of you guys may just say, hey, I'll let somebody abuse me as much as they want as long as I can keep getting what they're giving me. I'm not that way. I hope Notre Dame's not that way because I'm tired of USC dictating the terms of when they play. It's real simple. Hey, you want to play us? We'll do it at the end of the year. Real simple. USC doesn't want to do that because, and here's the thing, USC knows what's on Notre Dame's schedule the next decade in September. They know it's going to be incredibly difficult for Notre Dame to get them in September. They know that, which is why they're doing it this way, because they know that there's a good chance that Notre Dame is going to balk. They're just trying to here's what's going on. Let's be real about it, Trevor. USC is trying to force Notre Dame to cancel it so they can say, hey, we offered a deal to play at such and such time. They turned it down, and I don't know what else you want us to do. So my hope is that Notre Dame makes an official counter offer to USC's offer and says, hey, we'll play you every year for the next 30 years, but it's going to be the Saturday after Thanksgiving every year, whether it's here or there. I really hope Pete Bavacqua does that. I really do. And then if USC says no, then you say, hey, look, we tried. USC doesn't want any part of this. We're not the ones that brought up canceling the series. That's the whole point. Well, why doesn't Notre Dame just give in? Why should Notre Dame have to once again say, okay, because you want out, we have to now alter what we're doing to make you happy? Why? They've been doing it this way for 50 years. This October home, November road game for 40, 50 years. So now USC wants to change it because they jumped ship and took the money to go to the Big Ten. Why should Notre Dame have to once again bend over backwards to make that happen? That's my point. So as much as I want the rivalry to continue and as much as the rivalry needs to continue, I do think there comes a point in time where Notre Dame's got to put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to do this again. We're not going to keep doing this because now you say, okay, well, we've played it now. What's going to stop you from wanting to change it again in 5, 6, 10 years, whenever the next one comes out? What's going to stop you from doing that then? The answer is nothing. And they're going to know, okay, we got Notre Dame by the you-know-whats, because if we threaten not play them, they'll do whatever we ask them to do to get out of that series. Because that's the precedent we've set. Say, look, yeah, we want to play you. Why can't we do what every other big rivalry does? Why are we the big rival that has to play? Well, Oklahoma and Texas don't play. That's because they both have other big rivalries that always played at the end of the year for a long time, because Texas and Texas A&M would always play at the end of the year. USC doesn't really have that. So, that's kind of where I look at it and say, hey, listen, they want to try to do all this. Screw that. Here's what we're doing. We're going to play at the end of the year, just like Ohio State and Michigan, just like Auburn, Alabama, just like Florida State, just like Clemson, South Carolina. Right? We're going to play the end of every week. We're going to play in rivalry week, just like every other big rivalry. And then do it. Because here's the other thing. By the end of the year, here's the other thing that I don't like about the early games, Trevor. By the end of the year, those games have no significance whatsoever. Because what we've also seen in modern college football is September doesn't matter as much as what happens in October and November. Doesn't matter. USC, Notre Dame play in the second week of the season. By the end of the year, the games that are determining whether either team is in the playoff are happening after that, not during that. And that's why it takes away some of the meaning of the rivalry. Why play it early? Name me another huge rivalry that happens in the first 2-3 games of the season. It doesn't happen. So if USC doesn't want to play us late in the year, I'd say fine, then have fun playing in the Big Ten. Have fun replacing us with some team nobody cares about. Good luck with that, selling out that stadium when you're playing San Jose State instead of Notre Dame. Or late in the end of the year when Rutgers is coming to town to end your season. So, yeah, that's where I'm at, Trav. Is I hate to say it, but I'm tired of USC just kind of basically getting to determine how it's going to be played and when it's going to be played.
I'm still torn on this. And there's part of me that is thinking with my heart, and there's a side of me that's thinking with my brain. And unfortunately, on the Notre Dame versus USC topic, those aren't in line, and that's always a rough situation and a rough spot to be in. I want this game to continue because this was a game, like I talked about earlier in the show, it's the game that made me love college football. It's the game that showed me that, hey, like, this rivalries in sports matter. I mean, for the first 2 hours before kickoff of the Notre Dame USC game, my dad had to explain to me why this was a big deal. I was 8 years old. I was just like, football is football. It's like, what's the difference between this and, Michigan versus North Carolina in football? Like, you know what I mean? And so my heart wants this rivalry to continue playing. But, when you look at this logically, if Notre Dame is willing to move this, then I think what that shows is it's just prolonging the inevitable. That this will eventually go away. It's just not going to happen in 2026. It might happen in 2036. Why do I say that? Well, I've watched Notre Dame's season really get dictated and the outcome get dictated about what happens in the first 2 weeks. So you play this out. There's nothing that shows me that USC is going to start taking over this rivalry. There's not. I mean, could they make it more competitive? I mean, maybe. But Notre Dame hasn't beaten Notre Dame in South Bend since 2011. Do you know how much stuff has happened since then? I've gone through high school. I've gone through college. I've moved. I've gotten married. I celebrated a 1-year anniversary in the amount of time that USC has spent winless when they travel to South Bend. So there's nothing that shows me if they move it to the start of the season. So then what happens? That's going to put USC behind the 8 ball. Yep. Throughout the start of the year. And then there will be times where their Big Ten schedule is you might have to get Penn State and Oregon in the same year. Or you might have to get Oregon and Ohio State in the same year. And now at this point, you might have to get IU and Ohio State in the same year. And so if you move it to the start of the year, I think that just prolongs the inevitable because the next thing is USC's not going to like that. They keep losing to Notre Dame. And then that puts them behind the 8 ball to start the season. And then what's USC going to be left with? You negotiate to move it back to where you just tried so hard to move it away from, or they're just going to go away from it entirely, which is really, really upsetting. So my heart wants this rivalry to remain, but my brain is telling me that if it doesn't remain, home games in October, which is already a compromise because apparently those West Coast kids are too good to come and play in anything remotely close to not 70-degree weather.
Right. Which they're going to have to do anyway, eventually.
Yeah,
I mean, the Big Ten's been nice to them last year, and they're nice to them again this year by putting all their road games early. But
Yeah, which is silly because you joined the Big Ten. So unless you think that in the month of November you're going to get 5 straight home games, like you're going to have to travel out east anyway. So I guess if you want that to be against Northwestern or Rutgers or Maryland or not Notre Dame, that's fine, I guess. But
what they've done, what they did last year was give USC a bunch of home games at the end of the year, and then their road game was Oregon. Right. That's what they did this year. Excuse me. And then last year, they did the same thing in November, and they had their road games were at Washington and at UCLA. It's like they're giving them like the West Coast teams. That's not going to happen forever. And that's kind of the point, is maybe they're hooking you up now that way, but you know, good luck assuming the Big Ten's going to always do that to you. So you can avoid it for now, but to your point, you're not going to be able to avoid it forever. And what's your crowd going to be more excited about in November? Notre Dame versus USC, or USC hosting Rutgers? Traveling to Rutgers. That's the game your team's going to get fired up about. That, you know, it's frustrating.
I think some people keep getting confused about this because I keep seeing in the chat, like, well, who do you replace him with? What's the problem with playing early? Let's play this out. Let's just say they agree to move it earlier. So Notre Dame's expectation is they start the season in week 1 next year at Lambeau Field against Wisconsin in a neutral site game. Then the week after that, they play USC on the road. And then in 2027, Notre Dame is going to then what? They're going to start out their season against Purdue and then at Michigan State. So you'd have to play them in week 0. What happens when your schedule starts to get a little bit tougher?
There's a week in between. It would be Purdue, USC, Michigan State is how their season would start.
And then you start getting into the later schedules. So in 2028, Notre Dame hosts Texas on September 9th. Then a week after that, they play Arkansas. And then the week after that, they're on the road against Purdue. So then what? You'd have to play USC on the road the week before? Like, that's the expectation?
So your season's going to be USC, Texas, Arkansas, Purdue. Right.
Then the year after that, you get Alabama in week 1. And then at the end of September, you get on the road against Texas at Texas Memorial Stadium.
Yep.
And you also travel to Florida and play USF. So you're also supposed to fit USC at home in that stretch of time.
Yep.
2030, you get Indiana at home. You get Alabama on the road within 2 weeks of each other. So you need to fit a USC game on the road also in between there. Yep. Like, that's just not, that's not sustainable. Like, I just,
Yep. 2030, Indiana, Alabama in September, August, September. You're going to fit USC in there. So I would say, hey, look, we're going to play you at the end of every year. That's how it's going to be. That's our counter proposal. You don't either, we keep it the way it is now. If you don't like that, play at the end of every year. Because, again, you move it up into September and those games lose their meaning. They just don't have – I mean, Alabama or USC in 2016 started the year 1-3 and finished the year ranked in the top 10. Because nobody cared about what happened in September. They cared about how that team was playing at the end of November, and they were playing phenomenal at the end of November. But you know, that's the whole thing, Trev, is look, it would be better for Notre Dame throughout history to have always played this game early in the season, because then they could get the loss out of the way early and then run the table and beat Stanford at the end of the year or Rutgers or somebody like that at the end of the year and be good. And I'm just like you said, Trev, I'm tired of, you make a great point. You do one, they're going to keep coming back and asking for more. That's just kind of just how it is.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the compromise in my eyes is you just move this game to the end of November.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to look at this as unbiasedly as I can. If USC is banging on the table that it's like we're in the middle of our Big Ten schedule in the middle of October, so we don't want to keep coming out to South Bend in that, it's like, okay, fine, then move it to the end of November. That is the neutral compromise. It is. Yeah. And unfortunately, I just don't know if that's going to reach it. But all I know,
Big Ten, say, hey, can you give us UCLA and Notre Dame at the end of the year?
Yeah.
So when you play Notre Dame on the road, play UCLA the week before at home. When you play Notre Dame at home, play UCLA on the road the week before. Works out perfectly for you.
Fair. I mean, all I know is right now, Notre Dame on FanDuel, they're 9.5-point favorites. And this conversation is getting me fired up enough that I hope they do double that just because it's rivalry weekend. And this conversation is getting me fired up. So here's to hoping that happens, but I'm not holding my breath for that. That's for sure.
I ultimately, Trev, I just want some clarity on the future of the rivalry. I'm tired of talking about will it or won't it. Just go out there and handle business this weekend and then figure out what's going to come next. Because right now, I don't believe next year's game is set in stone.
No, it's like on the future schedule, but it basically has an asterisk above it, and it's like maybe. Yeah. So, but I'm with you. I just want clarity. But here's to hoping we get that soon. But folks, that's going to do it for part 1 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We are getting ready to dive into what's at stake for this matchup, specifically Saturday night when Notre Dame takes on USC under the lights in Notre Dame Stadium. But before we get there, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel, we are talking Notre Dame versus USC. It's rivalry week up in South Bend, and there is a lot at stake. You called me about an hour before the show started, and then we basically just talked for about 30 minutes about how fired up we are for this game. There is a bunch at stake, a lot at stake, and some of it's obvious, and some of it is very rivalry specific. The obvious ones, Notre Dame is 13th, USC is 20th. Both teams are looking to build their playoff resume. Notre Dame is riding a 4-game win streak. USC just picked up probably their biggest win since joining the Big Ten, beating Michigan at home, the 15th ranked team in the country, 31-13. So both teams have momentum coming into this game for the first time in quite some time. So that's kind of the obvious one. But Brian, there is a lot at stake for this matchup. And some of it goes back to the conversation that we had in the first part of this show. If this is in fact the last game of this rivalry, you got to win it.
Yeah. Whether it's forever, for 5 years, whatever the case, you want to end this rivalry with the win, especially on your home field, and especially even more so with what's at stake. There's both teams are essentially, and like trying to kind of knock each other out of playoff contention. I would argue that USC's playoff hopes are not dashed by losing to Notre Dame. I think you've got to kind of play in the Big Ten title game now at this point in time, and they're now in a single elimination mode, but if USC ends the regular season 10-2, guess what, folks? They're probably playing, in the Big Ten title game, or if Ohio State and Indiana both run the table, because I don't think USC plays either team. Correct? Am I correct on that, Trev? I don't think USC plays Ohio State or Indiana.
Right. Yeah,
and then Indiana and Ohio State don't play each other. So there's a chance they could end the year with one loss and not playing it, but that actually wouldn't be bad for USC, because if they're 10-2, and their losses are a road loss to a good ranked top 25 Illinois team and a road loss to a 10-2 top 7 Notre Dame team, USC is in the college football playoffs. And I think that they'll have enough good wins at that point in time, beating Michigan, who will, maybe only be an 8-4 team, that they'll have a road win over Nebraska. They'll have a road win at Oregon, a home win over Iowa if they're 10-2. But it puts them in a situation where with a loss, they can't lose to Nebraska on the road. They can't lose to Oregon on the road, or they're out. If they beat Notre Dame, they can survive a loss at Oregon if it's a close game and still be a college football playoff team. We saw Ohio State lose last year to a 6-5 Michigan team in an ugly game, and they still made the college football playoffs. So I think USC, if they beat Notre Dame and they lose to Oregon, that's a huge resume builder for your football team. And so I think that's kind of a big thing. There's a lot at stake for both teams. For Notre Dame, you're in single elimination mode, and you can't allow your last game against USC potentially to be a game where they knocked you out of the playoffs. Like big picture, just right there, Trev, that's the first thing at stake in this game. And then you get into, okay, well, just overall about Notre Dame's resume, and we'll dive into that next. But just from a rivalry standpoint, you can't let your potential last game be one where USC knocks you out of the playoffs the year after you won the title. And then you get a chance with a win to make USC's – their playoff hopes are on life support because now they got to beat Oregon at Oregon. But as long as it's a close game, if USC loses to Notre Dame in a competitive game and they run the table, they're an easy playoff team. And then the only question is, are they hosting or not? I think that'd be the only question. So there's a lot at stake for both teams. But Notre Dame, it's losing, you're done. Lose, and we're not talking about the playoffs anymore. That's what's at stake.
There's so many good storylines coming out of this game too. Before we dive into, the last big game on the schedule and what this means, I mean, big picture, there's so many key storylines that we can talk about here, Brian. I mean, like I said before, it's the 20th anniversary of the Bush push. You have, this could be CJ Carr's only opportunity to play USC.
That's so crazy.
As crazy as it sounds. You and I were talking before the show started. How many Notre Dame quarterbacks in the last 20 years made a name for themselves in this rivalry? Quinn in 05, Kaiser in 15, Book in 18.
Tony Rice in 88.
Yes.
Yep.
Like, you think of all these quarterbacks, this could be CJ Carr's only opportunity to play USC. You have the Christian Gray redemption story. I mean, where fans started to falter with Christian Gray was because of the USC game.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why he's such a polarizing player to talk about on Notre Dame's defense is because of what happened last season in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have some of the offseason drama added to it. You have Chad Bowden's comments when he went over to USC. You have all of
he even went to USC.
Yeah, you have the fact that that was the school that he goes to. And then the comments about him finally getting to recruit for a coach that loves recruiting and all the other things like that he said in the offseason. You have, USC hasn't won in South Bend since 2011. You have Lincoln Riley versus Chris Ash, which is something that we'll be talking about throughout the week. There are so many different storylines going into this, but this is what you want from a rivalry game.
Yep.
It's not just, because in years past it was, can USC spoil Notre Dame's playoff chances, or can Notre Dame spoil USC's playoff chances? Now you're in a game with so many different storylines feeding into it, and that's the stuff that I love about college football rivalries.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why I hope that this doesn't go away. But like we talked about before, kind of out of our hands, but Brian, there are so many different things that can come out of this game, and it's just all fuel to the fire for either team.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's even storylines for USC in this. It's not just all Notre Dame centric. I'm sure that Jaden Maeva remembers walking away off that field in the Coliseum last game of the regular season, and his last two drives of the regular season ended in back-to-back pick sixes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that we don't have to remind him of that. I'm sure that Lincoln Riley knows that he's 1-2 against Notre Dame, and the last time he took a trip up to South Bend, the game essentially stopped being competitive once foot hit leather.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm sure that he doesn't need reminding of that fact. So there's a lot of different storylines for them too, man.
Yeah, and he took a lot of that out, I think, on Notre Dame last year. I think that was something that played into, part of that. Because one thing you and I have talked about, Trev, is say whatever you want about Lincoln Riley's head coach. That dude is a wicked smart offensive mind. As we're seeing this year, this is not a USC offense that's just insanely talented like it's been in the past. Their running backs that are now injured are good players, but they're not Reggie Bush, Lendell White, kind of players. They're not Joe McKnight, the late Joe McKnight type of players. They're good football players. Mekhi Lemon's a dude. Jacoby Lane's a good player, but this isn't like Keyshawn Johnson. This isn't Nelson Aguilar. This isn't like some of the crazy Mike Williams. This isn't some of the crazy talented offensive teams. Please don't take that as me saying they're not talented. They're very talented. The point is, what makes it, Jaden Maeva is a good quarterback, but he's not Matt Leinart. He's not Carson Palmer. The system is elite, though. And he has really good players, maybe not elite everywhere, but he's got really good players in an elite system, and it's clicking for him right now. It is. I mean, even in their loss, Trevor, they scored 32 points. It's not like they got shut down. They fell behind, I think, 24-10, and it's just like, you're not keeping this offense down for 4 quarters. They're eventually going to figure it out. And so, I mean, that's kind of, where you say, and like, Roger Dodger, you could say, isn't USC the number 1 offense in the nation? Well, they were also the number 1 offense in the nation coming into South Bend 2 years ago. Like, and that was a different type of talent. Like, that to me was, Caleb Williams is a far superior player, in my opinion, to Jaden Maeva. But what's cooking is I think he finally found like the right mix of players. last year's receiving core was more talented than this year's receiving core, but that was kind of part of the problem last year, Trev. There's way too many mouths to feed. Now it's like you got your dude who's number one, you got your dude who's number two, then you've got your complementary players, and then you got two really good tight ends. And now it's like we can now get into a rhythm where it's like one series you've got Mekhi Lemon on this field, the next series it's Zechariah Branch, the next series it's Deuce Robinson, and you got to figure out all these ways to keep all these guys happy. Now you don't have to worry about that. And so I think it's really been the perfect storm for them so far, Trevor. Their offensive line has improved in a lot of ways. So, like, this is a good offensive football team, and Lincoln Riley's got it cooking. We'll dive even more into it. I'm kind of already jumping ahead a little bit, but just looking at it from that standpoint, like, that's what makes this team dangerous. And so for Notre Dame, you know, this is sort of your chance to kind of go out there and thrive in that matchup that kind of tells us, like, okay, you know, is this legit or not? But, like, the other thing about this, Trevor, is you look at the rest of Notre Dame's schedule. This is the last big game on the schedule. Like,
kind of by a lot.
Yeah. I mean, we're sitting here hoping that Pitt can win out, you know, as a 2-loss team and maybe get ranked by the time they play. We're praying that a bunch of upsets happen so Navy, who just needed a comeback win over Temple, can get ranked. But then Notre Dame beats them and they're knocked out. But even if Navy looks great and gets in and Notre Dame it's still not USC. This is your last chance to play like a team that's good. When you beat them, if you beat them, it says something like, hey, see what Notre Dame did to USC? That's a big win. And that matters big time for this team.
Oh, it sure does. I mean, even if Navy's undefeated and ranked, big picture, voters, and they're not going to care. I mean, yeah, Notre Dame beat an undefeated ranked Navy team last year 51-14. And when they were making the playoffs, people weren't like, and they beat Navy. They just, unfortunately, the optics, they're not going to care about that. We are going to understand that that's a good win. It's a good quality win over a good opponent, one that went on to beat Oklahoma in a bowl game. But it won't have the same optics as Notre Dame USC. Boston College has completely fallen off the rails. Syracuse looks like a shell of itself since Steve Angeli got injured. Unfortunate for him. Stanford is really, 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 really bad. And so it's just, this is the biggest game remaining on their schedule and likely their last ranked opponent on their schedule, barring something crazy. Who knows what happens with Pitt? Maybe that win over Florida State is going to help propel them forward. I think they found something with that freshman quarterback that they started to go with. So maybe they go on a little bit of a run, but I'm not pushing all my chips into the center of the table based on that fact. You got to handle business against USC because this is your last opportunity to really put that signature win on your resume, because I think we can have a healthy conversation around there aren't a lot of other wins that they can say that they have so far that they're going to look back on people like, yeah, that's a really, really good win. Unfortunately, you got to win this one. Got to win.
Yeah. And the other side of that is this is the last legitimate stumbling block to you. Like, look, could Notre Dame lose to Pitt? Could they lose to Navy? Sure, it could happen. But it would require Notre Dame to beat themselves. This is the last opponent that can actually beat you. Now, should they beat Notre Dame? No. Is Notre Dame the better team? Yes, on paper, they're the better team. They have more talent, but that doesn't mean that Notre Dame's going to win this football game. Notre Dame also had a better roster than Texas A&M at home, and look how that turned out. So it's one of those games, Trev, where you look at it and say, this is the kind of game where you say you win this game, and now you look at the rest of the schedule and you're saying it's going to take them to completely choke to drop another game the rest of the way. You lose this. Here's the counter. You lose this game, you will not be one of the 3 lost teams at the end of the year arguing we should be in the playoffs, because at that point in time, you will look back at this season and say, Notre Dame went 9-3. These 2 SEC teams went 9-3. This really good Big Ten team went 9-3. What's the one thing that those teams haven't? Those teams all beat a ranked opponent. Notre Dame went 0 against their 3 ranked opponents. If you don't win this game, that's a bad look. That is a bad look. So that's also part of kind of what's at stake for this game too, Trev. I'm not saying that they're going to lose, but I'm saying that's the reality of this matchup. If you lose this game, you are likely going to finish the year 0-3 against teams that were ranked when you came into that matchup. 2 of them at home.
you turn into 2019 with a little bit more of a difficult schedule. That's who you are. You beat the brakes out of the teams that you should beat the brakes out of, and then when you play a quality opponent, you lose. That was 2019 Notre Dame in a nutshell. And the committee knew that. That's why they buried them at 16th, and they just never got above that. I mean, that will be Notre Dame's fate this year, and I don't think they'll have the grace of being ranked as high as 16th.
Right. Because if your resume's built on we beat a really good Navy team, and this is the point you're making earlier, Trev, then you don't have much of a resume. Like, that's a quality win. If you beat Navy this year, that's a good win. But that should be like your 5th or 6th best win, not your best win. Or maybe 2nd best win, and NC State's your best win. Like, Pitt's your best win. Like, those should not be in the conversation for best wins. It's got to be USC. And that's what you talk about. What's at stake for Notre Dame this weekend? That's absolutely 100% what's at stake this weekend. When you look at this and you start talking about your resume builder, if you don't win this game, we're not even going to talk about the playoffs anymore. We'll still do Tuesday night playoff shows when the rankings come out, but we won't be talking about Notre Dame, other than as we read off 25 is Memphis, 24 Notre Dame, 20, and that's the end of the Notre Dame conversation. And so that's kind of what's at stake. With this game, as far as like you're talking about playoffs. We haven't really addressed the playoffs a ton in this show since the A&M game, because for this very reason, none of the teams you were going to beat were playoff builders. They were get your season back on track builders. Now you're 4-2. You're into back-to-back really good home wins over Boise State and NC State. Quality teams, not elite teams by any stretch of the imagination. Quality teams, but again, need to be like your 3rd, 4th, and 5th best wins of a season. You were always building to this point. And that's why it was so important that USC won last weekend. Because this gives you a little bit of like, okay, we beat, a ranked USC team who had just smashed Michigan, who the pollsters loved going to last week. I just love how they completely dropped Michigan after one game. Like, they got them 15th, they lose to USC, and it's like, they're out completely. I'm like, you guys, more people voted for Penn State to be ranked last week in the AP after losing to UCLA than people that voted for Michigan, who lost on the road to Oklahoma and USC. Like, AP voters that's an interesting breed of human beings, bro. They got some weird stuff that they're doing, but it was important because USC, for some weird reason, wasn't ranked. And now they are. And so this is your chance to build your resume up, and it's your last resume builder.
Yeah, everything that they've done in the previous weeks has been building up to this point, to the point that you made earlier. I mean, there's no more litmus test. It's if you can perform well against this team, then you can perform well against USC. That's what all of these last couple of weeks have been building up for. If you're able to defend NC State's passing offense and Arkansas's passing offense, then you should be able to be effective somewhat relatively against USC's passing offense to a degree. If the offense can move the ball on the road against Arkansas and you're able to put points on the board against NC State, then you should be able to put points on the board against USC. That's what it's all about. But this is the test. There is no more like, oh, it's a litmus test. For who? For Boston College? No. For Stanford? No. So this is going to be the one that really shows us where. But Brian, let's dive into this a little bit more specifically. What is at stake for the Notre Dame offense in this matchup?
It's interesting, Trev, because you get some people that get real in their feelings, like when you say Notre Dame struggled against Boise State or struggled against NC State. And people get all upset and start making excuses for them, but they did this and they did that and they did this. And I'm like, what are you guys comparing this to? Like, what's your standard for saying that Notre Dame played well the last 2 weekends? Is it how they used to be on offense? Well, this is better than the way it was before. Well, that's not the standard. The standard is that side of the ball good enough for you to go win a championship? And for a chunk of the season, that has been true. The last 2 weeks, it's been good, but the standard isn't, are you a good top 25 offense? The standard is, are you a championship caliber offense? And there's been some flashes the last 2 games, but they haven't played to that level. I'm not losing my mind over it, because that's part of the beginning of the season. You're going to have some ups and downs, but you can't sit there and watch them play the last 2 games and say, okay, now that you're playing the best opponent you've played in this 3-game stretch, you can keep doing that and you're totally fine. Well, sure, if your defense can once again hold another really good offense to 7 or 13 points, but eventually one of these teams is going to have a day on your defense. And so that the thing is, the offense has been big play oriented the last 2 weeks, but they haven't been efficient. And they've got to get back to being more efficient like they were against A&M and Purdue and Arkansas, and be a team that can score a bunch of points, still rip off big plays, but move the chains more consistently, get off to a faster start. And so if you're going to win this game, and more importantly, really go kind of prove something, you're going to need your offense to kind of get back on track to playing like it did. I'm not saying it needs to score 46 points in every game against Power 4 teams, which it was doing at one point in time, but you got to get back to being the unit that you were during that really impressive 3-game stretch. The talent is there. It's just they've got into a little bit of a rut, which happens. We've talked about this. There were games in 2019 when LSU's elite offense, and I'm not comparing Notre Dame to them. I'm making the point that even that offense that averaged 48.4 points per game had a rough game at Mississippi State where they only scored 36 points. Does this sound familiar? Like, Mississippi State in 2019 wasn't a very good football team. That team went 6-7. That team lost at home to Kansas State. That team was not very good. They lost to Louisville in a bowl game, and they beat them 36-13 in a game where LSU only had 413 yards and 6.9 yards per play. Well, it's kind of similar to what Notre Dame did to NC State this weekend points-wise, but Notre Dame had way more yards and a better yard per play average than what they had. And then a week later, they go play Auburn. They have 508 yards, but they're only 5.8 yards per play. They ran 88 plays, only scored 23 points. And so you got into this little couple games of you're not playing your typical self. And then the next week in the first half against Alabama, they ripped Alabama apart. That's going to happen. So we're admitting that that's happened to this team. Now you got to figure it out and start playing better. I mean, we look at last year's Ohio State offense, and the last month of the season was very mediocre. They eventually figured it out and dominated in the postseason and won a championship. So it happens to everybody. It's happening to this offense. But do you get out of the rut now? Or do you get out of the rut coming out of the bye week and you go play BC after you've fallen to 4-3? That's the question.
Yeah, Notre Dame's offense needing a bounce back doesn't mean they've sucked. I think people need to understand the context of where we're coming at. I'm not saying it's anybody in the chat right now. It's just I've seen it over the last couple of weeks. We put out articles with the titles of, Notre Dame's offense looks to bounce back this week against NC State, or Notre Dame looks to turn around the offensive performance, and people automatically assume that means that they're bad. Not at all. I mean, Notre Dame's offense still, for needing a bounce back, is still 14th in the country in points per game. They're still 19th in the country in passing yards per game. They're still 16th in the country in rushing touchdowns per game. So this hasn't been a bad offense. It's just per their standard. It needs to turn around. And it has to turn around quickly because USC is the team that can test you and push you to that limit. And that's something we'll get into here when we talk about the defense. But a bounce back is necessary. We're starting to see a little glimpse of what this offense was last year around this time. With big plays, but inconsistent. It's just last year it was happening in the run game, and this year it's happening in chunks in the pass game. That's the difference. And so this has to become a more balanced offense, personnel-wise, pass to rush-wise, being able to sustain drives, finishing in the red zone. But as long as you're able to start doing those things, that this offense is going to turn around extremely quickly. They didn't score 105 combined points between Purdue and Arkansas offensively by accident. And so that's just some things that they have to clean up. Brian, defensively, and this is going to be a huge.
This is also the kind of defense that you need to be able to get right against, because it's not a great defense, but it is better than the defense that you had last year. You faced last week.
Yeah.
So this defense will hurt you if you make some of the same mistakes that you had last week.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I agree. Well, let's talk Notre Dame's defense then, Brian. What's at stake for this unit in this game?
Are you for real? I mean, like, last week you did a great job against NC State. Great job. Not overly surprised they shut down Boise State. Arkansas performance was pretty good. But I just think this one's a little bit different than last week. I think you could argue that skill talent-wise, USC and NC State are comparable. I think C.J. Bailey and Jaden Maeva are comparable. I would argue that C.J. Bailey's more talented. Jaden Maeva is more experienced. I would take Hollywood Smothers over any running back at USC, but USC's second and third are better than NC State's second or third. There's nobody on NC State's roster, in my opinion, as good as Mekhi Lemon. But you take their 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I think they stack up very well with NC State's 2, 3, 4, and 5. Lake McRae is a good football player. Justin Jolly's a really good football player. Offensive lines are good, but not elite. Steady, protect the quarterback well, run the ball well, but they're not elite. It's a very comparable talent-wise, but here's the big difference. NC State didn't have Lincoln Riley calling plays for him. That's the difference. I've said this, if you put the NC State talent at USC, the numbers don't look a whole lot different than they do right now for USC. And they don't look a whole lot different at NC State. The difference is this coaching staff will do a much better job of trying to find the weaknesses in the Notre Dame defense and go at them. And so that's the big thing for me, Trev. It's like, this is a truth serum. Yeah, you're good enough to shut down NC State. You're good enough to shut down Boise State, even Arkansas. Those are great accomplishments because those are good football teams. Those are good, really good accomplishments because they're good football teams. That doesn't mean you're prepared to go shut down Ohio State or Indiana or Oregon or, teams that you're going to be playing in the college football playoffs. Georgia, Alabama. Great. You shut down C.J. Bailey and that receiving corps. Awesome. It's going to be a little different animal in the playoffs when you got to play Ty Simpson and Ryan Williams and Jeremy Bernard and Isaiah Horton, right? I mean, so that's the thing is where USC, to me, because they have the not only the talent, but then also the system in place that is elite. And the thing that's held them back the last couple of years is their offensive line's been a mess. Their offensive line is much better this season, Trevor. I think we were talking about before the show, what did they only allow, like 9 pressures against Michigan? Something like that. Like, that's a good performance. That's a solid front seven for Michigan. And they kept Jaden Maeva pretty comfortable in the pocket last week. So that's kind of where I'm at, Trevor's. That's the test for the defense. It's not like you're facing a level of talent that's so much greater than what NC State had or Arkansas had. Your talent level at receiver's better than what you had at Arkansas. I don't know that the running back talent's better than what Arkansas had, and I don't think their offensive line's as good as Arkansas's. But again, it's with Bobby Petrino's a heck of an offensive mind. Lincoln Riley's, in my opinion, a little bit better. And I also think Lincoln Riley's the type of offensive coach that he is really good at finding weaknesses and exploiting weaknesses in your defense. And he's a patient play caller, which is really drives you nuts as a defensive coordinator. Because you're like, I think we got him. And he keeps prodding and poking. And then all of a sudden he found it. Okay, that's the sweet spot. And he's just going to keep going at it 10 different ways. That's what makes him a great offensive mind. I still question him as a head coach. I always will question him as a head coach, but I'll never question his offensive mind. And I feel a lot better about where the defense is right now, but this one makes me nervous. It does.
Notre Dame's defense doing what they did to Arkansas, Boise State, and NC State was impressive, especially considering what they allowed in the first half of Purdue. But you take that frame of reference out of it, this is, the best slot receiver that you've faced all season. And I'm going to be honest, from a talent-wise, I don't know if it's overly close. I know Malachi Toney's doing his thing down at Miami. Mario Craver's done his thing. Mekhi Lemon is a beast.
But Mario was kind of more of an outside guy, the way that they used him at times. Like, he kind of went inside and out. He wasn't the pure slot like Mekhi is. I'm adding to your point. Like, I'm agreeing with you. They don't even use him in the slot.
Yeah.
All the time.
They don't even use him in the slot. Used him in the slot against Notre Dame, and he had 207 receiving yards.
Right. Right.
So this is pure slot receiver wise. This is by far the best you have faced or will face this season until you get to, the postseason. And then, you try to tackle the, Ryan Williams or Jeremy Bernards or Carnell Tate or, you open up that can of worms.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't think, speaking to your Arkansas conversation, I don't even think Notre Dame got Bobby Petrino's best. Different conversation for a different day.
Was it on purpose or not?
Yeah.
That's the question.
But I also don't think that you got Bobby Petrino's best Boise State is a quality offense, but pound for pound, horse for horse, they could not compete with Notre Dame, and we saw that.
They're very well coached,
Yeah.
very sound schematically, but they don't do the things that put you in the bind that a USC does, and they don't have the horses that USC does.
No. So this is the test to see if Notre Dame's defense has truly turned a corner, in my eyes, and one that if Notre Dame is going to have success in the postseason, we will have to look back at this game and say, okay, they did a really good job with USC's offense. It's going to look different.
Yes, it's not going to be 7 points.
No, it's not going to be 7 points,
right.
And it's not going to be 233 total yards of offense. That's just
correct.
If they do that, then I will sit here and say that this is the best defensive turnaround in this short of amount of time that I've ever seen.
Yep, and it wouldn't be debatable.
No, but it will be relative. Doing a good job against USC is holding them to like 400 total yards of offense because they average 552 on the season.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is a good offensive performance. I mean, last year, Al Golden's defense, and people aren't ready to have this conversation. Al Golden is 1-2 against Lincoln Riley.
Yes, not as a team, his matchup.
Yes, his matchup, his performances against USC, Al Golden's 1-2. So this is the one few matchups that this season Notre Dame fans can't really be like, oh, if only we had Al Golden back for this one. It's like, Al Golden kind of got worked in 2 of the 3 games against Lincoln Riley. So
now
this is a huge test.
Like you could say that the 22 years a bit of an asterisk because he was missing Cam Hart and Tariq Bracy and all that. But the fact is schematically, he got worked by Lincoln Riley on that day. You know, USC had 436 yards, only ran 61 plays. They were 7.2 yards per play. Rush for 204, pass for 204. 2024, last year, USC went for 557, 35 points, 557 yards. Actually, I would argue that they were even more impressive than offensively than they were 2 years ago. Because remember, one of their touchdowns the year they scored 38 was on a short field. And so they went for last year, they went for 557, 7.2 yards per play in a Notre Dame win. And then in 2023, that was the anomaly. 20 points, 308 yards, 4.2 yards per play. They got to 20 points, but that was aided by a 60-something yard punt return by Zechariah Branch. They didn't really threaten Notre Dame a whole lot in that game, and you made Caleb Williams look very mediocre in that performance. But that was the anomaly in this matchup, Trev. That was the one that was a little bit different. And the other thing you can look at in that regard is like, okay, this is a chance for Chris Ash and his staff, to your point, to say, okay, no more wishing that Al Golden was still here. Now it's just time to say, let's keep getting this version of Chris Ash and this defensive staff. Yes. That's kind of what is going to be the key. And, whatever influences are on Chris Ash that have been on Chris Ash, I hope they continue. Because my concern in this game, Trev, is that Notre Dame is going to go back to the sort of let's play passive, afraid to give up the big play, which is what they did in 22 and 24, and it ripped them up. They had nothing to lose in 23 and coached like it. And they just ripped USC up. This is a better offensive line than the one you faced in 2023. I would argue, I don't know that the skill talent is good overall as the unit that they had in 2023. Jaden Maeva is not. He is not. Be clear, not Caleb Williams. That team had Marshawn Lloyd and Austin Jones. That team also had Taj Washington, Brendan Rice, Deuce Robinson, Zechariah Branch, Mario Williams, Dorian Singer. All still had Lake McCree. And Marshawn Lloyd was making plays out of the backfield. Like, I would argue that that was a more talented team. But I would also argue that team was more talented than last year's USC team that ripped you up. Fair? So it's a big test. It's a big test. My question is, Trevor, is it a home versus away thing with Notre Dame and USC? Because I know you have some very interesting numbers about that we'll talk about in the next section about it. So that's also something kind of like, okay, like you said, so they've won 13, 15, 17, 19, 23. They've won 5 straight at home over USC.
Oh, yeah.
Can they keep that rolling?
We'll find out. And here's to hoping that they don't bring up that passive defense because, look, at the end of the day, if they do, we've watched what Notre Dame's defense does passively against slot receivers.
Yes.
And that's a rough performance. But right now, FanDuel has Mekhi Lemons over-under set at 85.5 receiving yards on the afternoon.
Yep.
That's a lot. That is quite a bit. I think that's the highest over-under for a receiver that Notre Dame has faced this season by 20 yards.
Yep.
And that is a big line. But here's the thing, though.
Trev, go ahead.
If their slot receiver plays, if their nickel corner plays like how they played and they reverberate back to just this passive, I don't want to touch you defense, then you're going to see a performance like when Malachi Toney went for 82 and a touchdown. You're going to see when Mario Craver went for 207 and a touchdown. Here's hoping that doesn't happen.
Because if you think Mario Craver is a good football player, and he is, he's not Mekhi Lemon. He is not. And I'll say this. I think this receiving core, from a pure matchup standpoint, presents overall tougher matchup than Texas A&M's did. Now, that doesn't mean that, oh, gosh, they're going to go throw for 400 yards. That was as much of a schematic problem as anything. And we're not talking about how they match up against that secondary because that's not the secondary that USC is going to face. Forget even Christian Grace playing better. Leonard Moore got hurt early. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that you have a different nickel and a different starting safety opposite of Don Schultz. It's just a different secondary. It's a much better secondary. But you can schematically put this secondary in the same binds that you put that secondary in, and they're going to have success. Because I would argue that Jaden Maiev is a better passing quarterback than Marcel Reed. It's not the runner Marcel Reed is, but he's a better thrower than Marcel Reed is. He's a better pocket player than what Marcel Reed is, and they let Marcel Reed carve them up in that game with big plays. So, again, Trev, this is our final, okay, they're for real defensive moment. Like, they're going to have a game in November where the defense has an off day. And if that off day happens after having an off day on Saturday against USC, then you're going to start to say, maybe this defense isn't as good as we thought it was. But if you keep USC in check, again, doesn't mean you hold them to 7 points, but just keep them in check. I'd say probably 27 or below, at the most 27 or below. Then I'm going to be like, all right, look, I don't care that they had an off day against BC. They coming out of the bye and BC stinks and all that. You'll live with it if you shut this. Because then it's like you shut down Arkansas, you shut down Boise, you shut down NC State, you kept USC from going off. They're due for a rough day.
Yeah, we're moving further and further away from the out.
Right.
And that's
the first three games become the outlier at that point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a great point. Yep. Great point.
Well, listen, folks, it's going to do it for part 2 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We're going to wrap this up previewing the USC Trojans. But before we get there, make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, whatever streaming platform you listen to us on. We'd greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, Upon Further review is up on the premium message boards. You can check that out at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in the final part of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, we are talking the USC Trojans. We are giving a big picture preview into the team traveling up to South Bend, Indiana, this Saturday night, October 18th, to take on the 13th ranked Notre Dame Fighting Irish. We're going to get into the matchup discussion tomorrow. And believe me, there are a lot of good matchups to pay attention to. This is just a big picture overview for USC and what they've done so far this season leading up to this point. And when you start talking about USC, they've had a very, very interesting road to their 20th ranking. They started the season unranked in the preseason. They jumped in after some blowout wins. Their win over Michigan State was held in a pretty big light. And then they dropped out after their road loss to Illinois. And now they're back in after decimating Michigan at home in the Coliseum. So this has been a very back and forth season for the Trojans.
I think it was garbage that they fell out after losing to Illinois on the road.
Agreed.
Like Illinois. Now, look, Illinois led most of that game. USC comes back because it's a 4-quarter game, takes a late lead, and then Illinois goes down and scores a game-winning field goal, and then you drop them out as a road game. You drop them out. That felt to me like that reeked of you're still in your preseason bias. And I think that's been true for a lot. I think that's true for how the rankings are currently. I think that's true for how teams have been put in and how teams are treated. The only reason Penn State was even still getting votes last week before the Northwestern game was because of what people thought they were going to be in the preseason. And I kind of feel that way about USC. Now, in people's defense, none of the teams that they beat were great football teams. But sometimes it's not about who you beat, it's how you beat them. And when you watch USC play, they were playing very good football. And then, Illinois game happens and you lose a close game. It's your first, really tough road test of the year. Then you bounce back and you beat Michigan at home in a game that 31-13 could have been a lot worse than that. I don't even think the game was even as close as the score dictated. I think Michigan USC absolutely controlled that game. They absolutely controlled just the entire flow of that game. I don't think Michigan was ever really a threat. Even when it was 7-7, you're like, yeah, USC's just toying with Michigan right now. Outgained them 489 to 316, 7.2 yards per play in that game compared to 5.5 against. And it was really not a competitive game. And that's a game that until a week ago, all the people that do rankings thought was the 15th best team in college football. And USC beat them convincingly. So then they jump back in the rankings. They're number 20 this week in the AP poll. And you look at their schedule, Trev, and after this game, it's like it's a challenging schedule, but it's one that they can manage. I think there's, the Nebraska game will be a challenge, and then, Iowa at home will be a challenge. That's a great defense. I just don't think Iowa could do a phenomenal job, hold USC to 20 points and lose.
By double digits.
That's right. That's right. And then obviously playing Oregon on the road. And the way that UCLA is playing right now, UCLA beat Michigan State far more convincingly in East Lansing than what USC beat them.
Man.
I don't know how long that can go. But so the point is, this is a good football team. And Illinois is a good football team. Michigan State's a little up and down right now. Michigan State played hard in that game, and USC beat them. And then Michigan's a quality football team. They're not the 15th best team in the country, but they're a quality 8-4 caliber football team. And USC handled them. That's what good teams do. That's what top 25 teams do. They play teams like Michigan and whoop them. And that's what they did.
We've talked all this season about Notre Dame and the how, and how you beat a team matters. Mm-hmm. I watched USC for 60 minutes out physical Michigan, whose whole thing is being physical. That was one of our biggest questions about USC joining the Big Ten. It's like, will your West Coast style of spread it out, run this fast-paced offense translate over into a league that is known for their physicality? Well, they're going to need that. And it starts this weekend on the road against Notre Dame. Not very many teams, regardless of win or lose, can come into a matchup against Notre Dame at home and say that they out-physicaled Notre Dame. Notre Dame lost to Texas A&M at home. It's not because they were out-physicaled.
Mm-hmm.
They were out-executed. You know what I mean? You go and you look at the games on USC's future schedule. You're on the road against Nebraska. That's going to be a physical game. Now, I make a little fun of Nebraska in this, but the one thing working in USC's favor is if USC enters that matchup ranked, they're probably going to win because Nebraska hasn't beaten a ranked opponent since 2016.
It's their kryptonite.
Yeah, just the number.
If they were first and also receiving votes, Nebraska wins by 17. Yeah. They jump into the top 25. It's like, no, we can't play that team. We can't defend them. Yes, correct.
But you're going to have really physical games. You have Nebraska on the road. You have Notre Dame on the road. You have Iowa at home. And like you said, with the way that UCLA's been playing, I don't know if you watched that game. They out-physicaled Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted it more than they did. So that is my biggest takeaway from Michigan or USC's win over Michigan is that they were really physical. Something that we've kind of questioned about Lincoln Riley's teams before in the past. So the how you win is also just as impressive as beating the 15th ranked team in the country 31-13.
There was somebody in the chat earlier that said USC is a soft football team. I was like, you haven't watched USC play this year. Nope. Not with any kind of objective mind. Is this a vintage, like, this team reminds me of 93 Notre Dame or 17? No, I'm not saying that. But if you haven't watched this team play and say, you're just not going to bully them in the trenches. I'm not. Now, Notre Dame is better than them in the trenches. That's not the point. But the point is you're not just going to show up and bully them the way that you bullied some past teams because they are playing harder. You got to give Lincoln Riley a little credit for that. They're playing harder than they did last year. They're playing with more physicality than they did last year. I don't think Michigan is as good as Notre Dame in the trenches, but they were significantly better than Michigan in the trenches. And look, Michigan is a very flawed football team this year. There is no doubt about that. But the one thing they've done every game this year for the most part is run the football. And USC completely shut down their run game. And you and I have talked about how good Justice Haynes is, and Justice Haynes had run for at least 104 yards in every game he's played this year and scored in every game he's played this year until they played USC, and he was held to 51 yards on 10 carries and didn't score. So you can say whatever you want about what Lincoln Riley and USC were, but we evaluate what they are now. Now, we don't know what they're going to be coming out of the Notre Dame game. We've seen Notre Dame break this team before, and hopefully they do it again. But the fact of the matter is this is not a soft football team. This isn't 95 Nebraska either. So if you're going to sit here and say they're a soft football team, you're just one of those fans that this is what I love about some Notre Dame fans, Trev. And I love Notre Dame fans, but Notre Dame fans will complain until they're out of breath about how disrespected Notre Dame's schedule is every year. Oh, why? I don't know why ESPN's always disrespecting our schedule. We play a tough schedule. Then, like, every week that we break down an opponent, you guys are giving this team too much credit. This team sucks. Well, how's their schedule tough if every team we break down, you guys all think suck? It's like you got to pick a lane. This is a good football team. This is not last year's USC. And so, but that also doesn't mean that they should beat Notre Dame in the trenches. It means that Notre Dame's lines are going to have to play well like they have the last couple games. Because I don't think USC's defense, I don't think Texas A&M's defensive line is any great shakes. Look what they did to Notre Dame. NC State beat Notre Dame's offensive line in the trenches last week. They couldn't block Brandon Cleveland. Whole game. Could not block Brandon Cleveland. And if NC State can do that, then why can't USC? That's the point of where Notre Dame is going to have to be. But when you watch this team play, it is very clear that Lincoln Riley has made a concerted effort to say we have to play better football in the trenches. And they are. They are. Michigan's not a very good football team, but they're physical.
Yeah, that's the one thing that can hang their hat on.
Field last week. That's right. They weren't the most physical team on the field on Saturday against USC.
Kind of sparks the conversation, right? Preseason, there was a lot of talk around, we got a lot of super chats, a lot of buy-sell holds around, what coach is on the hot seat and what coach could be on the hot seat. And Lincoln Riley's name was floated around quite a bit. With the way that their season has been going, I think it's kind of cooled some of that conversation a little bit. Now, this game will be extremely telling, because if you're USC and you're the administration with USC, as much as you're trying to get rid of this rivalry game, you do get evaluated for how you play against Notre Dame, not how you coach against Purdue or Georgia Southern or Missouri State or even Michigan to a degree. The Michigan game was a step in the right direction, but ultimately you're going to be evaluated by how you play against Notre Dame, especially on the road, considering you haven't beaten Notre Dame on the road since 2011. And so that's going to be extremely telling. But, Brian, I wanted to get your thoughts on it. What do you think? Do you think that the way the season has started out so far, is this kind of the turnaround season that Lincoln Riley needs?
It has been so far. And now, this doesn't look like – I don't know that the standard for Lincoln Riley this year to make people happy is this has to look like 05 USC. It's like you got to show that you're on an upward trajectory. And so far they are. But I would also argue that the next month and a half is could end all that, because 2 years ago, we're talking about USC being 5-1 and coming into this game, ranked and how that's good, and they're playing good football and all that kind of stuff. Let's not forget that 2 years ago when USC came in to play Notre Dame in a game where they were, this was the game 7 for USC, game 8 for Notre Dame. So same game. USC came into that game undefeated and ranked number 10 in college football. And you look at that year, they blew out San Jose State, they blew out Nevada, they blew out Stanford, they beat Arizona State by a couple touchdowns, they won a shootout against Colorado, won a shootout against Arizona. Coming to that game, and you're thinking, boy, the one thing this team can do is score on everybody. And then they play Notre Dame, and they couldn't score, and then the season fell apart after that. They lost the next week to Utah. They beat Cal by a point, then lost their next 3 games to Washington, Oregon, UCLA, before rebounding with a a bowl victory over Louisville. But, you look at that offense in 2023 coming into the Notre Dame game, their lowest point total of the season that year, lowest point total of the season was 42 points in 6 games. They scored 56 in the opener, scored 66 in week 2. Not very good teams, but they didn't play very good teams this year. Scored 56 against Stanford, 42 against Arizona State, 48 against Colorado, and then 43 against Arizona. They were coming into this game averaging 51.8 points per game. But again, you could see then, though, that team had flaws. You could see then. We talked about it. Their defense was a mess. This is not a great defense, but it's a much improved defense over what it was 2 years ago. The offensive line was a mess. This is a much better offensive line. So now, but also the skill talent's not quite what it was 2 years ago. So there's some trade-off. But that's why I say when we're just evaluating USC, forget the Notre Dame aspect of the matchup. We're just evaluating USC. I don't think they need to beat Notre Dame for this season to continue on an upward swing. It just has to be a 4-quarter game. That's what it has to be. Then you've got to come out of the bye, lick your wounds, make some adjustments, and then you've got to go on a 3-game win streak. You've got to beat Nebraska on the road. You've got to beat Northwestern on the road. You got to beat Iowa on the road. Because if you lose to Notre Dame, the question is, can you go on the road and beat anybody with a pulse? That's going to be a big question. And Trev, I know you'll have a follow-up to that here next, but if you lose at Illinois in a close game, at Notre Dame in a close game, and at Oregon in a close game, but you beat UCLA, beat Iowa, beat Nebraska, beat Michigan, there's enough of an upward trajectory to say with the recruiting class they're bringing in that, hey, let's show our support and see if we can fix it. And then next year you try it again. So that's where I think this game is important for USC is if you win, that's huge. Like, okay, program turned around. If you lose in a hard-fought 4-quarter game, you're on an upward trajectory. Now it's like, let's see how they finish. Because like I said, they went 7. What was their record 2 years ago, Trev, in 2020? Did they go 8-5?
8-5.
Right? It's 8-5. You were 6-0 coming in to play Notre Dame. Went 8-5. So it's going to be about what they do in the second half of the season, which begins against Notre Dame because they've played 6. They're 5-1. They got 6 left. And if we're being honest, the second half of the schedule was the one we always said was going to be the tougher part because neither of us were that high on Michigan this year. The Illinois game was the one that was going to be a battle, and it was a battle. They played their butts off, and that just wasn't quite good enough to win. And they had several guys missing that game as well. They were missing a lineman. They were missing some DBs, and they didn't get their full strength team and still almost won that football game. Well, they're going to be banged up against Notre Dame as well. They're down to their 3rd-string running back. There's some guys out, so everybody's banged up at this point in time. Notre Dame's missing their starting center. They don't have Charles Jagsaw. Everybody's banged up. That's not an excuse for either team. It's going to be about, can you compete in this game and then go on the road and beat Nebraska? Because as good as the vibes are right now for USC fans, drop these next 2 games and all of a sudden it's a completely different story. A month ago, Penn State fans would have told us, nah, James Franklin's a good coach. We should have beat you in the playoffs last year, blah, 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 blah. 3 weeks later, it's like, he was terrible. I'm glad they fired him. This thing can change in a hurry, Trev, in a hurry. Because you've got to think about that 23 game. Coming into that game, Lincoln Riley was 17-3. 17-3. And his losses were a 1-point bowl loss to Tulane. They lost by a point on the road to the Pac-12 champ in Utah, and then obviously got blown out by Utah in the Pac-12 title game. But he was 17-3. Had USC ranked in the top 10, was 1 game away from the college football playoffs in his first year. The narrative coming into that 23 Notre Dame game was very different than it is coming into this game. But if he wants to get back to that, he's going to have to win this football game, in my opinion. A loss doesn't get you back to that. If it's a competitive loss, at least it gets them thinking that we can get back to that. But since that game, they have gone, so they finished that
14-12.
14-12. And they were sub 500 coming into this season since that loss to Notre Dame in 23. So, yeah, this is a big game for USC. There's no doubt about it.
No, it is, man. I mean, you bring up the success that they're going to need to have on the road. Right now, as crazy as this sounds, USC on FanDuel, they have the 5th best odds to win the conference. I thought that was really interesting. I mean, they have better odds to win the conference than Washington, Nebraska, Iowa, Maryland, Illinois. Illinois' season is kind of done in the Big Ten after the losses to Ohio State and Indiana. But I mean, that's a pretty big climb up for USC. I think USC came into the season, it's like the 9th or 10th likeliest team to win the Big Ten this season. And then after beating Purdue, Michigan State, and now Michigan, they've vaulted them up to 5th, which I thought was pretty impressive. But you talk about the road wins, Brian, and that is where USC as a team needs to prove a little bit of something, that they can have success on the road. I went and I looked into some of these numbers between Notre Dame or between USC and how they perform on the road versus how they perform at home. Now, little caveats before I dive into these numbers. At home, some of the numbers factored in here were against Missouri State and Georgia Southern, but they did also have Michigan at home. They had Michigan State at home. But here's their numbers between home and away. On offense, USC at home averages 52 points a game. Again, helped out by the fact that they scored 73 against Missouri State and 59 against Georgia Southern. But on the road, they averaged 32.5. Total offense at home, they average 591 yards of offense at home, 475 on the road. Here's the biggest difference. They average 263.7 rushing yards per game at home and 152 rushing yards on the road. I don't see that number getting much better with their depleted running back room when they travel to South Bend. Their pass game travels. We can just call a spade there. At home, they pass for 327.3 yards a game. On the road, they pass for 323. So give or take 4.7 yards of averages. Their passing game is still good home or away. But in some of the areas that counts, offensively, their third down conversion rate at home is 64.5%. On the road, it's 43.9%. So they're not as effective on the road. Defensively, same trend. Points per game allowed at home is 19.3. On the road, they give up 25.5. Total defense at home, they hold teams to 313.5 total yards of offense. On the road, 429.5. Their passing defense at home, 206.5. On the road, 318 yards per game. Rushing defense, it's about the same home or away. They give up 107 rushing yards at home, 111.5 on the road. And then same thing with third down conversions. Again, third down conversions for USC at home, 28.9%. On the road, teams convert 58.4% of their third down conversions. So a huge, huge difference in between home and away for the Trojans. And again, it's not going to get much easier considering on the road, remaining on your schedule, you have Notre Dame, Nebraska, and Oregon.
So, Trev, coming into Lincoln Riley's tenure at USC, coming into the Notre Dame game in 2023, he was 6-1 on the road. Only loss on the road, true road game. So not like neutral site game, bowl game, Pac-12 title game, on the road. Their only loss was a 1-point road loss at Utah. Started 6-1. Since that time, including the Notre Dame game, they've gone 3-7 on the road. Their two of those wins were road wins in California. They beat Cal in 2023. They beat UCLA last year, and they beat Purdue. That's their 3 road wins. They're 2-5 on the road since joining the Big Ten, and those 2 wins are over Purdue and Cal. If you look at the teams that they've played on the road, last year they lost to a Michigan team that went 8-5. They lost to a Minnesota team last season that finished 8-5. They lost to a Maryland team that finished last year 4-8. They lost to a Washington team that finished last year 6-7. They beat a UCLA team by 6 that finished 5-7. And then this year, their 2 road losses, they did lose to a good Illinois team on the road. And then they beat a Purdue team that, in my opinion, is better than their 2-4 record. They're not a great team, but like their losses are to USC, Notre Dame, Illinois, and then a tough road loss at Minnesota. Minnesota's a solid top half-ish team in the Big Ten. And, like other than the Notre Dame game, some of those games were competitive for a while. The Illinois game was Illinois could never truly completely pull away from Purdue, blow them out the way Notre Dame did. But it also wasn't a game that Purdue was really in, like where you ever thought they were going to win. It was just a game you thought they could keep competitive. So this is something Lincoln Riley's got. He's got something to prove this week that, hey, can you go on the road and win? Just quickly from a Notre Dame standpoint, though, too, but that puts even more pressure on Notre Dame to say you can't lose at home to this team that has sucked on the road. Lincoln Riley is 9-8 on the road in his career. 9-8. Like, you can't lose that game, not with this talent that you have on this football team. And so I think there's a lot of pressure on both of these programs, but I would argue there's even more pressure on Notre Dame in this game to say, hey, look, you're supposed to win these games. So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, Brian, let's dive into each side of the ball here to wrap up today's show. Let's start talking about Notre Dame or USC's offense that they're bringing to town. And this is, again, sticking with the common theme that we've seen really the last month. This is the crown jewel of this team. Really, over the last month, every offense that Notre Dame has faced has kind of been the glimmering light of every opponent, and their defense is what has struggled. But you look at some of the numbers of what USC brings to the table, and it's really, really impressive. Third in points per game, second in yards per game, first in yards per play, seventh in rushing touchdowns. They're third in yards per attempt, second in passing yards per game. This is a good offense and probably one of the best ones that they'll face all season.
Yeah, I would argue that this is probably top 3 as far as offenses they're going to play this year. As far as just combination of talent, scheme, just production, all of it. Some people like to talk about Texas A&M being in that conversation, and they're not. Notre Dame made Texas A&M's offense look way better than it is. Texas A&M has not been an elite offense outside of the Notre Dame game. And so I think, to me, it's Arkansas, it's USC, and it's probably Miami is what I would say the best offenses. I mean, since Notre Dame gave up 41 points to Texas A&M, they scored 16 against Auburn. They scored 31 against Mississippi State and 34 against Florida. They're a good offense. They're not an elite offense, in my opinion. Arkansas is got good talent, but then elite coaching, in my opinion, in Bobby Petrino. Miami's not that explosive offense, Trev. They haven't scored 1 million points this year. But what they do is they're just really steady and really good. They're only scoring 35 points a game, but they don't beat themselves. They're well coached. They're not as explosive as USC, but they're sound. You're gonna have to beat them. They won't beat themselves. Sometimes USC will put itself in a position where they may beat themselves a little bit. We saw that with Illinois. They had some bad turnovers that proved costly in that game. So this is top 3, and you could make a case that this will be the best all-around offense when you consider talent, production, and coaching. I think you can make a case that this will be the best offense they face all year. It's at least debatable. But what separates them from NC State is, I argued earlier that the talent's comparable. The coaching is not. It's not even close. It's not even close.
No, Lincoln Riley is an offensive. I mean, USC is. I would argue that it's the best offense that Notre Dame has faced. I wouldn't
argue with you.
Complete with talent, coaching, all that. I mean, because fact of the matter is with some of these teams, I agree that Texas A&M, Notre Dame made them look better than what they actually are. Not to say that they're bad, and I know that you're not saying that either. With Arkansas, it's just a tough gauge because, like I said before, I don't know if we got Arkansas's best.
Right.
I don't know if we saw the full coaching on display. Now, just big picture, if you look at the team for what it is outside of playing Notre Dame, then yeah, Arkansas is the top 3 offense that Notre Dame faced. But when they faced Notre Dame, I don't know if the coaching was at its best. I don't know if Bobby Petrino was in his bag against Notre Dame's defense. And so I say all that to say, I do think USC's offense is the most complete and the best that they will have faced. Now, the knock on them is we're not going to get to see their running game at full force, in my opinion. With Wayman Jordan out and with Eli Sanders out, you're relying on King Miller, who is a former walk-on, and Brian Jackson, who's missed a handful of games this year also because he was hurt.
Hey, King Miller would like a word with you, Trevor.
Hey,
He ran all over Michigan. Your point is correct. I just thought it was great that he comes off the bench after those two guys get injured and carries the ball 18 times for 158 yards against them. He also had 4 for 80 against Missouri State, 3 for 55 against Georgia Southern. I don't know what he's going to do against Notre Dame, but you know what it is, Trev? You know what I can say that is certain? That's a great story.
Oh,
that
yeah.
is a kid that turned down Mountain West offers to bet on himself to come to USC, and look what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
So to add to the conversation, Trevor, if you look at the FEI, I just looked up the FEI. That's the Fremeau Efficiency Index, what I trust a whole lot more than the SP Plus and the FEI, which I think are garbage. But if you look at Brian Fremeau's FEI ranking, he's got USC's offense ranked number 1. Looking at Notre Dame opponents, Notre Dame is 6, Miami is 8, Arkansas is 14, Texas A&M is 18. So just kind of looking from it at that, and then NC State is 40, Boise State's 41. So I think if you look at the FEI, it agrees with our statement, which is it's arguable because you've got 2 other top 15 offenses on that slate. But I would, if you had to ask me to pick one, I'm picking USC because of that combination of talent plus production plus coaching. So that kind of backs that up. And so what makes this team tough, Trev? I think I've said some things that seem contradictory in this show. And I've said, look, I don't think their skill talent is as good as it's been in past years. I don't think it's as good as it was in 2023. But the difference is that the biggest difference to me is they have a defense that doesn't require them to have to score 40 every week, and they have a better offensive line. And I think that's helped them. You look at their rushing numbers, and you could say that it's skewed because they ran all over some bad teams, and that's true. They did. They ran for 233 yards on Missouri State. They ran for 309 yards on Georgia Southern. But this is also a team that ran for 289 yards on Michigan State, 7.2 per carry, and a team who last week, despite losing their top two backs during the game, ran for 224 yards on 36 carries against Michigan. And if you look at Michigan's rush defense coming into the game, in the 5 games prior, they gave up 50 to New Mexico, 138 to Oklahoma, only 3.5 per carry, 79 to Central Michigan, 43 to Nebraska, 75 for Wisconsin. The highest yards per carry average they had given up that year was 3.45. The next highest was 2.68. USC goes for 224 yards on 6.22 yards per carry. That's not just scheme. That is showing me that Lincoln Riley's more willing to commit to the run game this year than he was last year, which leads to them being a more physical team. It's not that he's relying on the run, which is making them more physical. It's not him relying on the run because they're more physical. Like him focusing more on the run is making them more physical. It's like what we talked about the Notre Dame defense. You sit back and play passive football. Don't be shocked when the players play passively. If you just sit there and throw it all over the yard every day, don't be shocked when your offensive line is more used to going backwards than they are forwards. And even with a lot of their passing stuff, a lot of play action this year, Trev, which again gets their offensive line kind of working vertically. And so you're just seeing a different version of the USC offense that honestly, part of the thing I like about it, which concerns me a little bit in this matchup, is it looks a lot more like what he did at Oklahoma early on. A lot more. And that's what made those Oklahoma teams so dangerous is they were balanced. They could run and throw. When he got hooked up with Caleb Williams, he got real pass happy, which I get. Caleb Williams has got that kind of arm talent. But this looks more like what we've seen in the past. The wraps, the gap schemes, the traps, the zones. Like this looks more like a team that's trying to be balanced and then looking for those opportunities to rip you up in the pass game because you have to now be more balanced in how you attack them. That's the thing. The passing offense, Trev, ranking second in the country in passing, and that stuff doesn't surprise us a ton. What's the surprise for me is that they're 16th in yards, 4th in yards per attempt, 7th in touchdowns. They're not giving up a lot of negatives, and they've been a good offense. And those 2 backs are good football players. They're not studs. They're not Marshawn Lloyd. They're not. I don't know that they're even Woody Marks and Quentin. I always want to say Quentin Dunbar, Quentin Joyner, but they're good backs, and they're not having him is going to hurt you, but I think it's more system driven than it is necessarily the backs were fueling the results. I think the offensive line is a big part of that too, and that's still going to be there.
It's a dangerous offense and one that can absolutely hurt you. The biggest thing that stands out to me is they just don't give up too many negative plays. You know, they rank 11th in the country in tackles for loss allowed. They rank 8th in the country in sacks allowed. They've only given up 4 sacks through 6 games. It's pretty impressive. And it's not like, and Jaden Maeva is a good athlete, but it's not like he's just this elusive guy that is impossible to bring down. Only allowing 4 sacks is really, really impressive. The number that I think is interesting is their turnover numbers. You know, they've only thrown 2 interceptions. I went back and looked. Their backup quarterback doesn't have any either. They've just lost 5 fumbles. You know, so really the only knock on this offensive unit is the fact that they've put the ball on the turf too many times. You know, but Jaden Maeva has done a good job of taking care of the football. That was one of the concerns that we had with him coming into this season is, hey, we like him, but you look at how he finished the end of last season. It's what he had something like 7 touchdown passes and 5 interceptions in the last 2 games. Like, hey, he's a little turnover prone. This year, through 6 games, he has 2 interceptions. He's done a good job of taking care of the football. Some of that, I think, is a byproduct of him having a better relationship and better chemistry with the primary targets that he does have.
Yeah.
Because he's not
the guy
to force throws. Yeah.
Yeah. He came off the bench last year. I mean, Miller Moss was their starting quarterback to start the season. You know what's interesting, Trevor, is you look at they have one common opponent, and what's interesting is Notre Dame's offense against Purdue had 535 yards, 8.5 yards per play. USC's had 460 yards of offense, 6.7 yards per play. But then you look on the other side of the ball, and Notre Dame and USC held Purdue to fewer points, fewer yards per play than Notre Dame's defense. It is amazing how quickly the narrative about Notre Dame has changed from where it was then, you know, but what we are seeing, the point I was going to make is this is a matchup between 2 of the best offenses in college football.
Yeah.
That's what makes this just a fun matchup, because this is not there's a comment from Mad14ND. He says, you know, I don't like looking at numbers because they can be bogus. Depends on who plays who. And that's always a very fair point. That's always very fair because teams can put up big numbers against bad teams. And I totally get that. But when you look at USC this year, the thing that makes me think this is not these are real numbers is, number one, look at the efficiency rankings that takes into account garbage time, who you played relative to your opponent, things like that. And they still rank number 1. But there's also a level of consistency that we've seen from USC. I mean, their lowest yardage total of the season is 460 against Purdue. Their lowest yards per play average is 6.4 against Illinois. And so they have been a consistently good football team. And, you know, yeah, I know that Indiana had a huge day against Illinois, but Indiana had 8.0 yards per play. USC was 6.4. Indiana had 579 yards. USC had 490. It's not like USC was just far outpaced by them. They were outpaced in points. But one of those games was at home and one of those games was on the road for Illinois. The point is they have been a consistent offense so far this season. Lowest point total of the season is 32. Lowest yardage total of the season is 460. Lowest yards per play is 6.36. That level of consistency when you have now played 4 Power 4 teams says this is a very good offense. Will they rank this high after they've played Notre Dame, Nebraska, Iowa, and Oregon? Who knows? But that's true for a lot of people who have yet to get into really the meat of their schedule. But what I can say with certainty, and this is why it's important for fans to understand, it's like when people ignored us about that Boise State's defense was better than they looked on paper, and then people were shocked when Boise State's defense looked better against Notre Dame than they did on paper. He said this about NC State last week, and people didn't want to believe it. And what the problem is, if Notre Dame does play well, and people don't recognize how good the opponent is, then people don't necessarily give Notre Dame the credit for how good they have to play to shut an offense like this down. This is a legitimately very good offense. It's one of the 10 best in college football, and I don't know that that's debatable.
I agree. And it's one of the reasons why Notre Dame has to come in with an effective plan and an aggressive game plan. Because I would make the argument that unlike Boise State, unlike Purdue, unlike at times against NC State, And honestly, at times against Arkansas, you can't just out-athlete them. This is one of those offenses that you can't just say, well, our guy is just better than Mekhi Lemon. Well, our guy is better than Jacoby Lane, who's 6'4", 200 pounds. Like this is one of the few offenses that you face this season where you just can't flat out say that. You can say that at times. Yeah, 100%. Like that's why this I agree with you, Mad Friendy, that it's not always just about numbers, but then you also have to start looking at trends. And when it's not like they did this against Missouri State and Georgia Southern, and then they played Purdue and scored 10 points. It's not like that, So this is definitely going to be one to keep an eye on. Brian, what do you think about defensively? Because again, like I said, common theme for Notre Dame opponents has been their offensives have been really good and the defenses have been what has struggled. And I think some of these numbers tell that story a little bit for the Trojans defense.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think a lot of that, though, is bolstered by the performance against Illinois, where they were pretty banged up and missing some guys. I think if you look at their defense, it's improved overall. They gave up 224 yards to Missouri State, who's not very good. Gave up 377 yards to Georgia Southern, again, who's not very good. You look at Georgia Southern next 2 weeks, they did a lot more, but it's against teams that weren't very good. Fresno held Georgia Southern to 135 fewer yards than USC did in comparable yards per play averages. Purdue, they gave up 357 yards, 5.3 per play. Michigan State, they gave up 337 yards, 6.1 per play. Illinois, they gave up 502 yards, 8.1 per play. Michigan, 316 yards, 5.5 per play. That's improved from where it was a couple years ago, but it's still not a great defense. And it's got improved talent. It doesn't have the elite talent it used to have. They're on a slow build back to being a good defense. The one thing I'll say is they're coached well. Danton Lynn does a really nice job. They're far more fundamentally sound than they used to be. They don't just give up this like, what the heck was that, as much as they did a couple years ago. They battle more than they did a couple years ago. They just don't quite yet have the talent that they used to have. They're getting closer, but that's the difference, Trev, is I actually think they're coached relatively well. I just don't think they have the horses. And then the other part, too, is their offense is on the field so much. I mean, their defense is on the field so much because of how explosive their offense has been that I think that plays a role in some of this as well. But they've been very opportunistic. And, you look at the turnover numbers. They've been very opportunistic. Second in red zone defense. They're more aggressive than they were last year, more disruptive. They rank 11th in tackles for loss per game, 7th in sacks per game, 12th in interceptions with 8 picks, forced 3 fumbles, recovered 3 fumbles so far. So overall, they're an improved team, Trev, but they're still not a great football team. And the thing that I would say the biggest difference where it's legitimately improved, their rush defense is legitimately better than it has been. Their pass defense is still a problem, but their rush defense is legitimately better than it's been in the past. It is.
Yeah, you talk about the recruiting needing to catch up with the level of coaching that they're receiving, and I think that the front 7 is a little bit ahead of the back 4 or 5, give or take. And I think that's reflective in the numbers that you're seeing. I like the talent that they have on their front 4. This game will tell us if it's like truly like top level or if it's just been kind of good. They're definitely not bad, but I do like the talent on their defensive line, especially on their interior. And I do like their linebackers. Their linebackers are pretty solid. The back end of their defense is where they lack top end talent. And I think that's reflective, not even just in the passing numbers, but, you look at some of their other numbers. They allow 83 or they rank 83rd in the country in yards per play. Why? Because if players are able to break past their initial front 4, really kind of linebackers as well, the secondary doesn't have the talent to make stops in open space. Tackling has been an issue for the secondary as well. You look at their yards per attempt allowed, their yards per completion allowed, passing yards allowed, quarterback rating allowed, 30 yards completion allowed. The back end of this defense has struggled and has been one of the big reasons. And those are the rankings, including having played Michigan's passing offense, who didn't do a whole lot. Bryce Underwood threw for 207 yards. But again, him throwing for 270 yards brought their average down to 243.7 on the season. So this back end of this USC's defense has struggled. But, Brian, I do agree with you that their rush defense has improved significantly. We're going to find out how good and how much it has improved going up against Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. We'll get into that matchup tomorrow. But, again, I think that the front seven's evolution to being a good defense is better than –
You talk about how their numbers are bolstered by playing Michigan this past weekend and playing Missouri State and Georgia Southern, and you're absolutely spot on, Trev. You look at their performance this season. For Michigan, for example, Michigan has this was the fourth game that Michigan played against a Power 4 team. They give up 5.9 yards per attempt. The Michigan offense, had 5.9 yards per attempt against Oklahoma. They went 4.6 yards per attempt against Nebraska, 9.6 against Wisconsin, who's terrible, but they only went for 8. They went for 8.0 against USC. I mean, just to kind of, like I said, point out some of those things, that has helped them very, very much. USC, they held Georgia Southern to 5.2 yards per attempt. That's a Georgia Southern team that has been held under 7.5 yards per attempt by USC, Fresno State, James Madison, and Southern Miss. So, yeah, I mean, they have not been great stopping the pass this season. And unlike Notre Dame, who had their moments of struggling as well, they haven't really gotten a whole lot better, in my opinion. Luke Altmaier's a good football player. Do not get me wrong. I think that's a good Illinois team. There's some silliness being said about Illinois in the chat right now. But Luke Altmaier's a good football player. He's not what he was against USC and Purdue. Those are bad defensive football teams when it comes to defending the pass. And so I think those things all factor into that they're struggling. Now, they've also been banged up in the secondary, and that has to be taken into account as well. And they're a little healthier on the back end for this game than they were for some other games. Like, I think Kamari Ramsey, who's their best DB, I believe he missed the Illinois game. Trev, didn't we look that up last night? Isn't that the game that he missed?
Isn't
that the game
sure.
that Kamari Ramsey missed?
I think so, because he got food poisoning or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, but he didn't play against Illinois. That's their best DB. That factors into that one game where they weren't as good. So
the one thing that I will say, and this is big picture before we dive into the strengths of the offensive defense, I forgot to mention this earlier, but this is also a team that doesn't really do, outside of the defensive line, do a whole lot of rotating. And I think that's reflective in their snap counts on PFF. Their guys are just their guys.
Yep.
I mean, you go and you look at some of the snap numbers on PFF, and, they have 3 corners that really dominate everything. DeCarlos Nicholson, Marcellus Williams, and then Braylon Conley. But even then, the drop-off is still steep. Braylon Conley has the third least with 134 snaps. The next closest corner has 87, and that's DJ Harvey, who transferred in. They just don't do a whole lot of rotating on the back end. They don't do a whole lot of rotating on offense. Their 3 receivers are Mekhi Lemon, Jacoby Lane, and Tanu Hines, and then that's it. They don't really rotate in a whole lot of other players. So I'll be interested to see if at what point in the season, and I'm not saying that it'll be against Notre Dame, but at what point in the season does their lack of depth kind of start to come back to hurt them a little bit? Because you still have Nebraska on the road. You still have Oregon on the road. You still have Iowa at home. I think that is an interesting conversation, one that I'll be keeping an eye on for USC to see if their lack of depth hurts them at all.
It's funny, Trev, because, I like when you give these numbers, and I'll go look it up, and I'll give some data to support it. So I'm looking at the numbers. I'm thinking, dude, their numbers look very similar to the Notre Dame defense. I'm looking at PFF, and I'm like, the same number of guys that have played over 200 snaps, same number of guys. Oh, wait, I'm looking at both of them are still on Notre Dame. I hadn't switched the second one over to USC to compare the two. But, to your point, that Notre Dame has 7 players that have played 240 or more snaps, and 4 of those guys are DBs. USC has right now, or 220 snaps. USC has 10 guys that have played over that many. I think Notre Dame has two linemen? No, I'm sorry. Only one defensive lineman has played more than 200 snaps this year. USC has 1, 2, 3 linemen and another at 193, another at 175. That kind of adds to what you're talking about. They don't rotate a ton because they just don't have the depth yet. And that's something that they're going to have to continue to work on. That's why their class is so big in 2026. That's why they're bringing in 30 plus guys, because they know they need to rebuild their depth chart. And that's a great point also, Trev, is they did have a bye in between Michigan and Illinois, but they've played 2 pretty physical teams in a row. And now you're getting a third in Notre Dame. At what point in time does that kind of start to wear on you a little bit, to your point? It's going to be interesting.
We'll definitely find out as it unfolds. Brian, to wrap up this defensive section, we've kind of alluded to some of it, but talk to us a little bit about what some of the strengths are for this defense. And then we've obviously talked about the concerns in the secondary. But what do you think are some of the strengths of this team?
Well, I do like their linebackers, Trev. I mean, I like Eric Gentry. He's been a playmaker for them. I mean, he struggled to stay healthy in his career. That's been a bit of an issue. But when he's on the field, Trev, he produces. I mean, he leads them with 7 tackles for loss in 6 games. Last year, he led their team in tackles for loss. At the end of the season, he was their team leader in tackles for loss. Played 5 games. So in the last 2 years, Eric Gentry has played 11 games, and he's racked up 13.5 tackles for loss. Guy's very productive. He's a disruptive player. I think Braylon Shelby is a good football player. You look at what he's done the last 2 years. He had 3 sacks last season. He's already at 3.5 this season. I think Kamari Ramsey's a good football player. The Bishop Fitzgerald kid that transferred in from, I think it was NC State is where he came in from, right? He's a good football player, very productive football player. So they've got some good individual parts, Trev. I don't love their secondary overall because they're struggle at corner and nickel, but their safeties are pretty good. Their linebackers are pretty good. And the other thing, Trev, I know that this is something that you and I were talking about before the show. They're much better up the middle overall than they were a year ago. D-tackle, linebacker, safety. So that means Notre Dame's not just going to come out there and just gash them with ease like they did a year ago. You're going to have to earn a little bit more. And your interior linemen are going to have to play better. And you're going into this game without your starting center. And you've got a guy making his first career start against what I believe and what you believe is a much improved interior defensive line. It's not elite. This isn't like Sean Cody. This isn't like, but it is much better. There's quality athletes. They get after it, and it is an improved unit. Their thing is if they can't pressure the quarterback, they get in trouble because they can't cover. But their run defense is improved not just because teams don't run on them, because your yards per game would be high because of that, but they're still 37th in yards per rush at 3.5. So they are a legitimately improved front 7 than what they were last year. And Notre Dame's going to have to earn this win. The other thing I would say about it is they are different from some of the D lines Notre Dame has faced this year. Notre Dame has played some big D lines. Texas A&M's D tackles are big guys. Arkansas's interior guys are big guys. You look at Cameron Ball was like their small D tackle at 6'5", 325. You look at NC State this past weekend with Brandon Cleveland, who's a horse. That's a big kid who they had problems with. This is a polar opposite. This is small, tall, long, fast, athletic guys that present a different type of challenge than what Notre Dame faced so far this season. I'm not saying better or worse. I'm just saying different. And if you look at the size of their defensive line, their projected starters are 265 and 285 on the edge. Anthony Lucas has some size. Their backups are 265. That's Braylon Shelby. And then 225. But their interior, you've got 290 Devin Tompkins, 295 the Abasiri kid who Notre Dame looked at a little bit. Jakeem Stewart, who's a 5-star freshman. He enrolled early. He should still be in senior in high school, is 290. The only really big kid that they had that plays a ton is Keyshawn Silver, who transferred from Kentucky. He was a pretty decent athlete for a 330 guy when he wants to be. But like a lot of 330-pounders, his motor runs hot and cold. But when Like we said with Brandon Cleveland last week, and we'll talk more about this week. This is one of those games where kids like him are like, I'm going to put some NFL film together in this game. And so it's a much different type of front than what we saw that Notre Dame has really seen in recent weeks.
Yeah, the length of their interior defensive line, I think, is key. Because they're all, for the most part, outside of Keyshawn Silver, sub 300 pounds, but they're all like 6'5".
Mm-hmm.
Like they're like
long.
they're 6'5", 295, 6'5", 290. This is a very long defense. That's when you watch them on film, the first thing that stands out is they're significantly bigger than what they were last year when Notre Dame faced them. I mean, I remember watching Eli Raridan run that slot fade on that poor 5'10" linebacker, and it literally looked like a comedy. Like Eli Raridan goes out short side of the field, runs a slot fade, and there was just like some guy like almost my height, just like kind of running after him. They don't have that this year. Maybe have their starting linebackers are 6'6" and 6'3", and their 6'3" guy is their small guy. I mean, for a frame of reference, Notre Dame's biggest linebacker that plays is Kingston Viliamasa, and he is 6'3". That is USC's smaller linebacker because Eric Gentry's 6'6". This is a much longer team, which I think is also, Brian, to your point, helped them out in the run game. That's helped them be more stout up the middle. Mm-hmm. So, just to clarify, I didn't want to paint this picture that USC's interior were all like sub 300-pound guys because they're all like Howard Cross types.
Right.
Like they're more like Riley Mills types, like not same physical build, but like Riley Mills was 6'5", 295.
Longer, athletic, disruptive guys. Exactly.
Yeah. So, but that's basically the nutshell on USC's defense. Definitely a lot of – you did mention real quick, Brian, that you're still not completely sure on the D-line as a whole. I know you're a little bit higher on the interior.
Yeah. Well, and their edge players are solid. Anthony Lucas is having a solid season. I like Braylon Shelby. He does some nice things. And it's just overall, it's just not an elite. It's not like a, wow, this D-line is like, oh my goodness, I hope they don't come to play on Saturday because otherwise Notre Dame's in trouble. If Notre Dame plays their game, this is a matchup they should win. But the problem is Notre Dame hasn't always played their game this season. They didn't play very well last week against NC State. This is overall a better pass rushing D-line than the one they faced last week. The question is, can this D-line be as stout against the run as last week's D-line was, which was a little bit of a bigger D-line at certain spots. But, the question is going to be, like, can their athleticism give Notre Dame problems? And that's especially on the edge. We'll talk about more tomorrow, but like they're good, but they're just not like, they don't blow me away. They're a bunch of good, long rangy athletes on the edge. None of them have really popped on film to me. Like I said, Anthony Lucas is doing some nice things this season. Braylon Shelby's doing some nice things this season. Cameron Fountain's doing some nice things this season. They don't. But to your point earlier, that's the only three that they really have that do anything on the defensive line. Like, Anthony Lucas comes out. He has 2 pressures in the first game, 3 the next game, 7 against Michigan State. And the last 2 games against Illinois and Michigan, their 2 best opponents, he's got 1. So those are the things you kind of look at and you're like, okay, how good is this team really? How good is this D-line really? Well, we're going to find out this weekend against Notre Dame and on both ways. But it's the same kind of thing, like Braylon Shelby, 3 pressures against Missouri State, 1 pressure against Georgia Southern, 4 against Purdue, 5 against Michigan State. In the last 2 games against Illinois and Michigan, he's combined for 2. And he's played 66 snaps. So, like, that's where I look at it and say, Cameron Fountain, 4 pressures against Missouri State, 1 against Georgia Southern, 3 against Purdue, 4 against Michigan State. Last 2 weeks combined, 1. So, like, they start finally playing some good D-lines. Devin Tompkins at D-line, another example, has 11 combined pressures against Purdue and Michigan State, and then 2 combined against Illinois and Michigan. It's like that's the thing is, like, can this D-line play better? This is just from a USC standpoint, not the Notre Dame matchup specifically. But in the last 6 games, if they're going to play better against the Notre Dames, the Nebraskas, the Iowas, and the Oregons, they're going to have to step up in those moments because so far this D-line has feasted on inferior opponents. But they did not look the same against Michigan and Illinois as pass rushers. Run defense was pretty good against Michigan, but pass rush wasn't really there.
Well, good deal. We are definitely going to find that out and keep talking about it as the week progresses. We do have a couple of super chats, though, Brian, before we get out of here today.
Yep. We do.
First one from John Emerson. Thank you, John. Appreciate the super chat. Should the Irish use a lineman or tight end to pound the ball on 4th and short to solve the getting stuffed problem?
I think part of it, guys just got to execute better. I mean, that's really part of it, and you got to call better plays. I'm sorry, the Wildcat thing that they did. There's some things Notre Dame has done this year where they've used. I love motion, but there's a couple times they haven't used it correctly, where they actually use the motion of the post snap action to actually bring an extra defender to that side. I just think it's poorly schemed in 4th yardage situations, and that's where your run game coordinator's got to do a better job. That happens to also be your offensive line coach, where sometimes you can talk about 4th down and you could, like, John, I got nothing against what you said. Trev and I said this offseason, why not bring Sullivan Absher in on 4th and 1 and put it instead of Ty Washington? Why not? You're not throwing the ball to the Ty Washington. Like, it'd be different if, like, their number 2 tight end was like a legitimate pass option. You've thrown, what, 2 passes to Ty Washington all year? 1, maybe?
One, and it wasn't CJ Carr. It was Kenny Minchie.
So, I mean, like, it's not like he's a passing threat. Notre Dame here, I'll give you, we do the breakdowns every game, and I put them on the board. They're for premium members only, but I'm gonna give you a little breakdown, just a little nugget into why I think that one of the issues that Notre Dame had this game, and something that I think that they're having some issues with overall. But so let's look at the Michigan game. Let's see here, pull it up here. Let me find the film breakdown. No, I want to find the run game breakdown for this game. Where is it at? I have too many breakdowns on here, Trev. So this one here is now. All right, here we go. This is the run game one. So Notre Dame ran 12 personnel 11 times against NC State. They passed out of that formation once. So you lost your balance because 12 personnel had been a better run pass balance coming in. You didn't have that. You use it a lot near the goal line. If you're not going to throw to Ty Washington, why not put Sullivan Absher on the field in that situation? Why not? And get that extra big body. And so, like, and then, here's the thing is, don't take Ty Washington off the field. Take your second receiver off the field in 4th and 1. And then now you really put them in a bind where if they just want to go cover Malachi Fields one-on-one, then you can just throw a fade to them. Otherwise, you've now got a lot more big bodies on there instead of asking. I mean, they're lining up in some of these situations with, like, Will Paulding and Jordan Faison on the edge. Why? They can give all the effort they want. Those guys are $180, $185. They're not blocking an edge linebacker or a defensive end in that situation. So I think part of it's just bad scheme. And the run game is schemed, but the scheming of the run game has been very inconsistent this season. Some weeks I love it. Some weeks I'm like, they're just lining up and running the same thing over and over again. They're very telegraphed, very easy to see what things are going on. And that's an area where Mike Denbrock and Joe Rudolph are going to have to sit down and say, hey, what are we doing here? Like, we got to be a little bit more creative here. We can't have performances like this. And so I think that's part of it. But John, that's not going to change if you just because you put Sullivan Absher in the game. My point is there's deeper problems. Now, having said that, do I have any issue putting Sullivan Absher on the game? No, I do not. If you're not going to throw to Ty Washington, why not? Because here's the thing. You what if you want to throw the ball? What if it's 4th and 1 at midfield? Okay, cool. Then have Sullivan Absher stay and protect like you use Eli Raridan, and then use Eli Raridan as your second receiver on a route. He's pretty good.
Or the running back.
Use your running backs. There you go. So I think the problem goes much deeper than that. But it wouldn't hurt to put a talented player like Sullivan Absher on the field.
Agreed. Super chat from Go Irish. Thank you for the super chat. Local game time, weather concerns.
I never like rain in football. But I just don't think it affects the things as much as on a turf field as it used to. I don't.
No. I'm not too overly concerned.
The wind is what more concerns me. Is talking about 10 to 20 mile an hour winds. That's more concerning than rain. But in this instance, I feel like probably plays into Notre Dame's hands more than it does USC. But they're very similar offensively this year. So it's kind of like the effect may be somewhat neutralized. And it's not going to be cold, so that's not going to bother USC. But yeah, the thing about it is it rains on both sides of the field. And if it's raining for one team, it's raining for the other team. So who executes better and who's mentally tougher? That's what it comes down to.
Super chat from Michael S. Most physically dominant SC performance against Michigan since the Carroll era. SC destroyed Michigan in the offensive and defensive line and linebacker, Gentry, in areas of Michigan's supposed strength.
Okay. Thanks for the super chat, Michael.
Another one from Michael S. What is Notre Dame capable of doing that Michigan couldn't do to beat USC? Throw the football.
Literally everything. Like literally Notre Dame does everything better on offense than Michigan does. Everything. Notre Dame's also a better defense right now based on what we've seen than what Michigan is. Like Michael, Michigan, we've been telling you this since the offseason. Michigan is a average football team.
Yep.
That played nobody. And the only game that they played a team with a pulse, they were never really in the game. You take the 75-yard run from
Justice
Haynes out of that, and the game was never competitive. And Oklahoma's not very good either, as we've pointed out. So what can they do? Put better players on the field, throw the ball better, as Trevor said, be schemed better, and Notre Dame has all those things compared to Michigan.
Have Malachi Fields and Jordan Faison and Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Eli Raridan and Leonard Moore and Adon Schuler and Christian Gray and Boubacar Traore. Those are all players that Michigan does not have.
Right. I love Justice Haynes. He's not the second string running back at Notre Dame right now.
No.
They don't have a single receiver that's playing for Notre Dame right now. Their tight end's not playing for Notre Dame right now. Most of their offensive lines, barely in the two deep. A couple of them are two deep guys. Like, that's not a very talented football team. And their stud quarterback is sitting behind CJ Carr. And Notre Dame also has better talent on defense. They weren't coached real well, but we're seeing the last couple of weeks the talent start to rise to the top. So that's what they do. Put a lot better players in the field and have better coaching, because Mike Denbrock's a much better offensive coordinator than Chip Lindsey, with all due respect.
Super chat from Tristan Schaub. Thank you, Tristan. Would you say SC has a, quote, good offensive line or just decent and improved from last year?
Good. I think they have a good, from what we've seen so far, they have a good offensive line. Tristan, your question was legitimate to me a week ago. And I don't mean like your question is no longer legitimate. What I mean is I had that same question a week ago, meaning it was one that I was asking myself a week ago, because Michigan State has improved on their offensive talent. But one thing we've pointed out is their defensive talent is still way lagging behind. Purdue is we've said this, if Purdue had last year's defensive talent, they'd be a much better football team. Because they actually had a lot more talent on last year's defense than this year's defense. It's just all those guys transferred. And now they're coached better, but they don't have good players. This is the first time we saw them play like a legit D-line. And it's a good D-line. It's not an elite D-line. It's a good D-line. And they worked them. And they protected the quarterback pretty well. So it's a good offensive line. It is improved, but it's not like you can be improved from what you were a year ago, but if what you were a year ago was a hot mess and now you're just kind of a moderate mess, and you've improved, that's not what we're talking about. This is a legitimately good offensive line. Is it as good as Miami's? No. Is it as good as Texas A&M's? No. Is it as good as Arkansas's and NC State's? We'll see. I think I'd say it is on the level of those offensive lines, if not maybe a little bit better.
I was just about to say, I think right now, depending on how they play against Notre Dame, going into this game, I'm putting them in between, like a tier between NC State and like Miami. Like that's where I would have them in between.
So you'd have like some Miami, A&M in that top group, and then you'd have
like
them
USC
next ahead of NC State and Arkansas. That's fair. That's probably where I'd have them based on what we've seen, because I think they're better pass blockers than the Arkansas offensive linemen.
Oh, I do too. Well, and I do have them closer to like the NC State Arkansas side of the spectrum than I do to the Texas A&M. Sure. It will also depend on if Elijah Page is going to play. That will also play a factor, because they had to do some shuffling with their offensive line. Like they moved their left guard to right tackle and their right tackle to left tackle, and then started a new left guard. So it will also depend on if Elijah Page is healthy as well.
Mm-hmm.
A. Reagan, thank you for the super chat. The final beatdown, Irish 35, USC 13.
Hope you're right.
Man. Jimmy Costanzo, thank you for the super chat. Go Irish, FUSC.
So, Trev, you actually have met Jimmy. Jimmy was the guy that had his truck set up next to ours at the Indiana tailgate last year. So, yeah, you've met Jimmy. So, Jimmy's hooking us up with a parking pass for this week as well for this week's tailgate. Reminder, if you're in town for the game, our plan as of right now is to still tailgate. You know, obviously the weather and the rain and the wind, you know, may have an impact on that. But as of right now, our plan is definitely still to tailgate this weekend. So, my only request is that you guys actually bring your appetites. Don't just come and then hang out and not eat. My mom makes a lot of food for this stuff, and we had to take way too much food home. So bring your appetites as well this weekend for the tailgate. Trev will be there this time, so we'll both be there. Vince will not be there. He will be attending another college football game this weekend, most likely. One that his son will be playing in. But Trev and I will be there. My mom will be there. Ange will be there. So we're going to have a lot of fun this weekend. So if you're in town for the game, if you are a fan who lives in the area but you aren't going to the game, first of all, there's some tickets on sale on irishbreakdown.com that other fans are selling for pretty good price. But more importantly, if you live in the area, there's no rule that says you can't hang out at the tailgate and then go home and watch the game afterwards. So, you know, if you're up for a little bit of walking, you know, park over there a little bit far away and then walk up and hang out with us and have a good time. So I hope that we get to see a lot of you guys here this weekend when we're doing the Irish Breakdown tailgate. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, folks, that's going to do it here for us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast. If you haven't gotten enough of me, here in a little bit over an hour, I'll be joining Sean Stiers on IB Nation Sports Beat tonight, doing stock up and stock down, and then finishing with a little bit of rapid fire. And then tomorrow, Brian and I will be back at 1 p.m. to continue to break down this Notre Dame versus USC matchup. We're talking matchups that matter tomorrow. And for the new content plan, we're also going over keys to victory tomorrow. Definitely not going to want to miss that. Oh, looks like we got
real quick super chat that just popped up from Drew Rainey. It's been a minute, fellas. Brian, tell me your favorite USC game of all time. I fell in love with Notre Dame in '88 at the Coliseum. Love what IB does. Keep up the great work. Drew, that's mine as well. You and I are very similar in age. I was 10 when that game got played. That was the final game for me that made me fall in love with Notre Dame, like truly fall in love. Now, I was a Notre Dame fan because my dad was, but in the like before '88, I was more of a professional sports fan. I was Broncos, Celtics, Reds. Notre Dame was kind of I was a fan, but they weren't my primary love. '88 is when I started to kind of fall in love with them. They kind of went above the Celtics, kind of on the same level of the Reds, started to kind of pass the Reds. They weren't quite the Broncos yet, you know, but eventually, you know, by '93, they were on the same level as the Broncos. And then when John Elway retired, it was Notre Dame and then everybody else. You know, because so by the late '90s, there's no Larry Bird, there's no, you know, John Elway, and it was just Notre Dame. So, but it was the '88 game for me. And then the other one was actually one of the coolest games that I was a part of. Actually, it was a game that didn't really go well for Notre Dame, but I was at the 2014 game that Notre Dame lost. But it was just cool going down on the field at the end of the game and just standing there on the field and thinking about what I was standing on, you know, from a sports standpoint. I mean, you've had Olympics there. Super Bowl I was there. All the great Notre Dame USC games were there. And so like that's one of them. You know, they're the '92 game when Reggie Brooks went off. That's one that has always kind of stood out in my mind. You know, one of my favorite games when Julius Jones went off, I think it was in 2000, 2001, just ran all over USC. Those are some, but the other one that pops in my head a lot, Trev, is obviously 05 game, but the 2010 game was pretty awesome for me because I had just sat through the beat downs for almost a decade. And to finally get that sweet taste of victory over USC was my first year covering Notre Dame officially. Was like, okay, this is pretty cool. This is pretty cool. So those are some of my more memorable games.
Nice.
88's at the top, though. Yeah. Yep, that's at the fair. Top. Also, Trev, real quick, just to let everybody know, I think I told you guys last week that my wife's stepdad, who raised her, passed away about a week and a half ago, and so his memorial service is on Thursday. So we will be traveling the next couple of days. So I won't be home for those shows, but I will be doing the shows, and we'll be obviously doing with Trev, putting out content, and then we'll be back in town in time for the game on Saturday. So fortunately, my parents are in town, so they're going to be able to stay here and watch our dogs and all that stuff. But I will be on the road next couple of days, so just keep that in mind. Behave yourselves on the boards. But I will still be doing the shows because I told my wife, I said, I got to figure out a way to do the shows because it's USC week. We got to figure out a way to make it happen. So after the service, so with that in mind, our Thursday show will have to be at 2:00 because the service, the memorial's that morning. So we're gonna have to move the Thursday show back to 2:00. Everything else is going to be 1:00, but we're going to move that Thursday show back to 2:00 just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up on that. That'll be our prediction show and previewing, because it's another slate of really fun games this weekend, Trev, to talk about. So I just want to give everybody a heads up on that. So thanks everybody for being with us. You get Trev tonight. He and I'll be back tomorrow. Have an awesome rest of your day, everybody. I got breakdowns on the board, video breakdowns on the board that we did of the NC State game. Check those out. But we'll talk to you guys again here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.